Here we go. The May 21st, 2018 meeting of the Arundel County Council is now in session. We invite you to stand for the invocation and remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Smith will lead the invocation.
Let's bow our heads. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, we are meeting today to conduct matters of business, guide our hearts and our minds in spirits of fairness, rightful thoughts, and speech. Impart your supreme wisdom upon our activities so that our affairs may reach a successful conclusion. Thank you for being our source of guidance. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Good evening again. I'm glad we finally stopped praying for rain. I think we've had enough of it. I hope everybody enjoyed today, this beautiful day today. Madam Secretary, would you please read the ethics statement?
The Ethics Commission has asked that I advise you that under certain circumstances, members of the public may qualify as lobbyists when they testify before the County Council. If so, the law requires that certain information be filed with the Ethics Commission. The Chairman of the Ethics Commission has asked that those present review the Ethics Commission information in the foyer of these chambers. If there are any questions about lobbying requirements, speakers should contact the Ethics Commission in the Heritage Office Complex on Riva Road.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. We will now invite members of the audience who signed up before the meeting to address the Council briefly on any subject not included in the printed agenda. Remarks, of course, will be limited to 2 minutes. And I'm going to call, I have four names on the sign-up sheet. Jessica Zimmerman, Cameron Steele, Steve Perutka, and Matthew Casserly. Would you please come down and take chairs here? Once again, good evening and welcome. And Ms. Zimmerman, if you'll begin, name and address, please.
Hi, my name is Jessica Zimmerman. I live at 2507 Coxshire Lane in Davidsonville, and I am a rising senior at Archbishop Spalding High School. A lot of people have been asking me why I care so much about this issue because it won't even directly affect my experience at Spalding. However, this issue goes far beyond my own experience. With my high school years quickly coming to a close, I become more thankful each day for the time I have spent at Spalding. I've been able to thrive in a nurturing and safe environment for 4 years, and I want that very opportunity to be presented to all high school students. By moving forward in this construction, you are taking these opportunities away from both Old Mill and Spalding students while jeopardizing the safety of thousands of young people. This concern hits especially close to home, as my 6th grade sister also has plans to come through these doors that so many of my family members have also come through. I've continued with my efforts with the petition that I previously mentioned and was able to gain over 1,000 signatures on an electronic petition opposing this plan and promoting school safety for Old Mill and Spalding. I would ask you to please truly consider if moving forward with this plan is worth putting all high school lives in danger. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zimmerman. Appreciate you coming down. Mr. Steele.
Yes. Okay. Cameron Staley, 6 Waters Road, Serena Park, Maryland. Chairman and the rest of the council, thank you once again for listening to us regarding this issue. I am also speaking on behalf of the Old Mill proposed construction, and I'm speaking on behalf of all those who will be affected by that proposed school construction, specifically on the level of an educational institution. As a teacher, things are constantly changing in and outside of my classroom, and the social climate in which we live calls for schools and officials to relook at the safety measures and make changes according to the best interests of all students. All schools must revise their crisis management protocols. Unfortunately, we have seen this absence in the most recent school tragedies in Florida and Texas, just to name a few. And with that, as you look at the brochure in front of you that includes a map of the new school location, Old Mill High School will be extremely limited in the event of an active crisis on campus. They are restricted by having majority of their campus straddling I-97, in which they could not exit. And if the crisis were to occur on Grover Lane, they would be forced to evacuate across a dangerous New Cut Road and onto another high school campus. This is terrifying yet a realistic scenario, unfortunately. And again, I am in favor of a new Old Mill High School, as I believe they are due for an updated location that provides them with a safe environment and all necessary tools to succeed. Now, Councilman, this location is the opposite of a safe location. Please hear me out and vote for an amendment to relocate this high school to protect all students on both sides of the street. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Staley. I appreciate you coming down. Mr. Perutka.
Steve Peruka, 153 Mason's Crossing Court, Severna Park. I'm going to speak from a text tonight. I didn't do so good extemporaneously last time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm here to speak about the Old Mill Spalding situation. Gentlemen, you have heard much testimony from folks who oppose the building of a new major high school right across the street from an existing major high school. With some degree of success, I've been able to convince those that think that concerned citizens is just concerned about Spalding, that this group is concerned about the safety of all children. The kids that will attend the new Old Mill, the kids that will attend Spalding, and the neighborhood for that matter. We want the new Old Mill School to be built. I signed their Fund Old Mill petition myself last week after hearing the good folks from Old Mill speak. Build them a great school, gentlemen, not one that because of its proximity to another school makes both unsafe inherently, immediately, and for the next 50 years. Where in the world is a major high school situated across the street from another major high school? The Old Mill folks, I believe, will eventually regret this location if it is built there. I have convinced some, but not all of them, to this. But now I hope to convince you, gentlemen. Don't delay in building them their high school. Do it immediately. But vote for an amendment that forces the county to choose a safe location. And I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peruka. Thank you for your concise comments. Mr. Casserly, good evening.
Good evening, Council. Matthew Casserly, 406 Riggs Avenue, Severna Park, Maryland. I'm here to point out, I'm not sure if you guys all heard about the incident last week at Bowie High School where kids thought it was a good idea to do a senior prank and stage a school shooting with water guns and firecrackers. Thank God it wasn't the real thing, but I think it highlights an important point. High school kids are immature. High school kids are even stupid. The part of your brain that tells you not to drive fast, not to fight, not to try drugs, not to stage a school shooting with water guns as a senior prank is not fully developed in high school students. This is why you should not put two high schools of combined 3,000 students right across the street from each other. I think you should take that into consideration when you're talking about school safety. High school kids are immature and do stupid things. I'd also like to point out the obvious benefit of Spalding. It costs the county $15,000 to educate a single student each year. It's probably higher for high school students. Spalding currently has an enrollment of close to 1,300, saving the county upwards of $15 million a year. And Spalding's not asking for any of the money that they're saving you. What they're asking you to do is take them into consideration when you're making decisions about your constituents, some of which they include constituents of yours. Again, we're just asking you to consider the impact you'll have on Spalding students, constituents of yours, and an institution that's helping the county, which is saving the county money. The last thing is, at the last meeting, I asked you guys all to take a morning and take an afternoon to stop at Papa John's and watch the morning and afternoon routines at Spalding. I'd venture to guess that none of you have done it. Has anyone? No, I didn't think so. Well, you're about to spend $100 million, and you can't take a morning or an afternoon to go check if it's safe. And if you're offended by that comment, I would assume it's because you know I'm right. So maybe take a morning to check it out.
Thank you, Mr. Casserly. Thank you very much. Ms. Johnson, good evening.
Sorry.
Ms. Johnson, if there's anybody else that would like to testify in the invitation audience, you four are excused.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Is anybody else, please come down at this time. Ms. Johnson, please proceed.
Mr. Peruka, members of the council, good evening. Julie Johnson, P.O. Box 6634, Annapolis, Maryland. The last time I came, I was talking about, or telling you about my experience of meeting a very nice young couple, upscale, well-educated, 20s, 30s years old, and we were talking about the news, and the question was, well, why do so many people get so upset about a noose? After all, it's just a piece of rope. What's the big deal? So I told you about the crime against a man named Judge Aaron. His first name was Judge. It was not his title. He was a black man living near Birmingham, Alabama in 1957. it seems the Ku Klux Klan, a particularly violent group within the Ku Klux Klan, was having an election for new officers, and they were told, you want to be elected, you got to do something big, not just the standard, put on your robes, etc. So they wound up abducting this man. They took him to an isolated area. They beat him up. They brought out their razors. They cut off his scrotum, passed it around, saved it as proof of their accomplishments, and then dumped him on the side of the road to bleed to death. But he survived, and which was remarkable by itself. He nearly died, but he did survive, and even more remarkably, they actually prosecuted the people who assaulted him. And there were 4 separate trials, and in 4 of the trials, each defendant in those 4 trials was convicted and sentenced to 20 years. Of course, I ran out of my 2 minutes then. I didn't get to tell you about what happened afterward. As you might imagine, this man was seriously injured.
Excuse me, Julie.
Okay.
I don't know if you can hear that. We were having a little issue with the timer.
Okay.
Time is
This
up.
2 minutes is up?
Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson.
Oh, well, let me just say...
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Is there any item that any council member would like to place on the agenda? May I have a motion that the partial reading of any bill, resolution, or minutes constitutes reading of the whole?
So moved, Mr. Chair. Second.
Madam Secretary, please read the minutes of May 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, and 14th, 2018.
May 7, 2018, the meeting was called to order by Chairman Michael Peruka at 1 p.m. and opened with the invocation given by Mr. Fink, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. May 8th.
Excuse me, please continue.
Yes. May 8, 2018. The meeting was called to order by Chairman Michael Peruka at 1 p.m. and opened with the invocation given by Mr. Pruski, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. May 9, 2018. The meeting was called to order by Chairman Michael Peruka at 1 p.m. and opened with the invocation given by Mr. Peruka, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. May 10, 2018. The meeting was called to order by Chairman Michael Peruka at 7:03 p.m. and opened with the invocation given by Mr. Trumbauer, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. May 14, 2018. The meeting was called to order by Chairman Michael Peruka at 1:02 p.m. and opened with the invocation given by Mr. Walker, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
Thank you. May I have a motion to approve the minutes of May 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, and 14th, 2018?
So moved, Mr. Second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. The minutes of May 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, and 14th, 2018 stand approved as read. Madam Secretary, please read the titles of the bills to be introduced this evening.
Bill number 5318, an emergency ordinance concerning acquisition of real property, advanced land acquisition capital project. Bill number 5418, an emergency ordinance concerning current expense budget, fourth quarter fund transfer, and supplementary appropriations. Bill number 5518, an emergency ordinance concerning current expense budget, Board of Education, supplementary appropriation, and transfer of funds. Bill number 5618, an ordinance concerning personnel, classified service, exempt service. Bill number 5718, an ordinance concerning zoning, general provisions.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Madam Secretary, please read the title of the resolution to be introduced this evening.
Resolution number 1418, resolution endorsing financial assistance from the Maryland Economic Development Assistance Authority and Fund to Paragon Bioservices, Inc.
Thank you. So we're up to 1518, right? I'm sorry, do we have the constant yield hearing right now? Yes, thank you. We'll now hold a public hearing on the constant yield tax rate. Invite Mr. John Hammond to speak. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the council. For the record, I am John Hammond. I am the county budget officer, and I thank you for the opportunity to kick off tonight's fiscal year 2019 constant yield tax rate hearing. Section 2-205 of the property tax article of the Annotated Code of Maryland requires the State Department of Assessments and Taxation to certify to all taxing authorities a constant yield property tax rate, which will produce the same revenue in the coming year that was produced in the prior taxable year, exclusive of new construction. The law further provides that if the taxing authority intends to establish a tax rate greater than the constant yield tax rate, it must advertise and hold a public hearing. An advertisement was placed by this county council in the local newspaper, which adheres to the procedures required by state law, and was reviewed and approved by the State Department of Assessments and Taxation. Anne Arundel County's constant yield tax rates per $100 of taxable assessment for fiscal year 2019 are certified by the State Department of Assessments and Taxation as follows: 89.29 cents for the county, excluding Annapolis and Highland Beach, 53.81 cents for Annapolis, and 90.69 cents for Highland Beach. The FY 2019 proposed budget decreases the real property tax rate from 90.7 cents to 90.2 cents per $100 of assessment for the county, excluding the city of Annapolis and Highland Beach. Such a rate is still 1% higher than the constant yield rate of 89.29 cents and will generate $5,933,409 in additional property tax revenues above the constant yield amount. Additionally, the FY 2019 county tax rate applicable to the city of Annapolis real property is similarly decreased from 54.4 cents to 54.1 cents per $100 of assessment in the proposed budget. Such a rate is still 0.5% higher than the constant yield rate of 53.81 cents and will generate $174,723 in additional property tax revenues above the constant yield amount. Finally, for Highland Beach, the FY 2019 county real property tax rate is decreased from 87.7 cents to 87.2 cents per $100 of assessment in the proposed budget. This proposed rate is 3.8% less than the constant yield tax rate of 90.69 cents and will generate $10,628 less in property taxes than the constant yield amount. As required by law, this public hearing has been scheduled. Thank you and good evening.
Thank you, Mr. Hammond. The County Council will set the property tax rate for Anne Arundel County, the City of Annapolis, and the Town of Highland Beach.
Want to have the hearing? You need to have the hearing. Okay, all right.
Thank you, Mr. Hammond. The County Council will set the property tax rate for Anne Arundel County, the City of Annapolis, and the Town of Highland Beach at a meeting beginning at 9 a.m. on Thursday, June 14, 2018, in these chambers. The rate may exceed the constant yield tax rate. If there is anyone who wishes to speak on this topic, please come forward and state your name and address, and remarks will be limited to 2 minutes. Is there anyone who would like to speak on this topic at this time? Ms. Johnson. If there's anybody else who would like to speak, please come down at this time and take one of the chairs.
Julie Johnson, P.O. Box 6634, Annapolis, Maryland. I would simply like to remind you once again that when you make your decisions about how much you're going to decide to spend this year, you're creating a tax burden for your children, your grandchildren, and so forth. And the way I see it, these people are going to be absolutely overwhelmed with the tax burden. The job salaries, the income that they're going to be able to earn is not sufficient. It will drive us close to the situation of something of marginal incomes, if not outright slavery per se. Or they don't own the people, but it's oppressive economic abuse or economic conditions, and I think that you also need to look at the history when you look at the economic disparities between the very wealthy and everybody else. Historically, first you get restless and unhappy people who complain, and then this escalates, and the third step is that you're into civil war. And we've been through one civil war, and it was pretty horrible. And, on one day in Antietam, in Maryland, in Bloody Lane, 8,000 men killed each other. in one day. Gettysburg had 175,000 meet for 3 days. I don't remember the total that were killed in those 3 days, but it was huge. And the number crippled and maimed, and the number of people who developed what we now call post-traumatic stress was, again, overwhelming. And you affect the civilian population, which really has never been adequately totaled. So I would really ask you to seriously consider how much you really need to spend. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. We will now, will conclude the testimony with regard to constant yield. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill number 1518 as amended.
Bill number 1518 is amended, an ordinance concerning subdivision and development, adequate public facilities, public schools.
Thank you. Mr. Grasso is the sponsor.
Well, I can say, once again, I'm proudly to see that this legislation has worked. At least that's the way it appears to be. And I want to thank Mr. Trumbauer for being part of the group of Mr. Peruka and the administration. And I think we've hit a milestone. So I believe the county has addressed probably one of the first or the second steps of overcrowding schools. And I think it's a great thing we've done. So let's see how the votes play out.
Thank you. Mr. Marzick.
We support the bill, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any other discussion? If not, then we will open the public hearing on Bill number 1518. Would anyone like to testify on Bill number 1518? Seeing no movement, Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill 1518 as amended.
Bill number 1518 is amended, an ordinance concerning subdivision and development, adequate public facilities, public schools.
I understand there is a technical amendment. Madam Secretary, please read amendment number 5.
This technical amendment removes a surplus effective date clause.
Motion to adopt.
Move to adopt, Mr. Chair.
Second.
Any discussion? Madam Secretary, please call the roll on amendment number 5.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
Mr. Fink.
Aye.
Mr. Peruka.
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Amendment number 5 is adopted.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Please call the roll on Bill number 1518 as amended.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
Mr. Fink.
Aye.
Mr. Peruka.
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Bill number 1518 is amended, is passed.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Please read the title of Bill 2418 as amended.
Bill number 2418 is amended, an ordinance concerning zoning, conditional uses, licensed dispensaries, growers, and processors of medical cannabis, special exception uses, licensed dispensaries of medical cannabis.
The entire council was a co-sponsor on this. Does anybody want to speak to it? All right, Mr. Marzick.
We support the bill, Mr. Chairman. I hope you'll pass it tonight.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Marzick, I know that the county or the administration has announced that there will be a task force looking at this. I believe the first meeting has been scheduled, but could you give us a little bit of an update on the timeline that you anticipate that task force doing its work?
You know, I have them on my calendar. I apologize. I don't know off the top of my head what the dates of the meetings are scheduled, but
Sure.
We're planning to meet with the dispensary licensees, I guess, for lack of a better word, to try to do a lessons learned on what they've seen in the past year and a half or so since our code has been adopted, trying to find out some concrete recommendations as to what has worked well, what has not worked well, and try to move forward with recommendations we can bring to the council of what needs to be changed with the bill, whether it's a minor tweak or a substantial change that gets recommended by this group. We also will have, actually I just met today with Joyce Strand from the Cannabis Commission on the state level. She was asking similar questions. We've invited her to participate. I think that'll be more of a learning for her, but she was talking today about some of the things that she's seen in other jurisdictions as well. So I think having a outside perspective would be helpful on that. And we're hopeful that we have those recommendations as soon as possible. We've asked the council for anyone who wants to participate can, more than welcome to come and participate. If you give me time, I can figure out when those meetings are scheduled.
Oh, it's okay. I mean, I didn't need the particulars. I just wondered if you anticipated that the task force work would be over the course of 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, something like that.
I don't know a timeline off the top of my head. I'm hoping we can move expeditiously with this. I think we've worked well with, I don't like to call it a task force, I think, because I think that conjures up a big, more
Sure.
formal meeting than that.
Right.
I think it's
Work
more of a
group,
work group
maybe,
type.
yeah, okay.
Similar to what we've done with the APF group, where we can bring in the stakeholders who understand the issue well and can provide us with their insight.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Walker?
Mr. Marzik, who's on the commission and who appointed, or the workforce or task force or whatever it is, who appointed those?
We reached out to all of those who have received the licenses, so it will be anyone who has the license for dispensary in the county. The only two that are up in the air, I guess, would be in District 21, because one is applied in the city of Laurel, I know. I believe the other is applying in Prince George's County for zoning, so it may be 9 of the 11 as opposed to all 11 of them. So those are the members, and then we'll obviously have staff from planning and zoning and law involved with that.
So there aren't citizens involved in it, like making recommendations?
No, it's more just lessons learned from those who have been going through the process. I mean, they're citizens, presumably of the county, most of them, but
Okay.
If you have folks you'd like to have included in it, please send them along.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Any other questions? If not, we'll open the public hearing. Remarks to be limited to 2 minutes. There are some folks signed up. Let me call Richard Smith, Kevin Melanson, Jack Andrzak, Mark Zablotny. All right. Please come down and take seats. Thank you. Please let me just remind the panel to say your name and address as you begin. It makes it a whole lot easier for the record when the minutes are done. So please, let me ask for Mr. Smith first.
Yes. I am Richard Smith. I live at 12 North Southwood in the Homewood area, and I'm the co-owner of the building as well as a 17-year software veteran that's at the Open Path building at the down at the end of General's Highway. And I think that 2418 is a very good bill, and I've been really impressed by the leadership that everyone brought together in supporting it, and I thought that the last amendment made a lot of sense. It added a lot to the bill, and I applaud your efforts for that. But with all due respect to Mr. Walker, I'm not sure that I understand how this particular amendment adds value to this, and I would recommend that
He's speaking to
I understand. Yeah, I'm sorry, Mr. Walker, excuse me. It's out of order to actually speak about the amendment because the amendment is not introduced yet, so.
Oh, sorry. Anyway, I guess my recommendation is that 2418 as it exists right now should be accepted. I encourage us to continue that momentum that already began and to get it into action and address the clear need that this is satisfying. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Melanson.
Kevin Melanson, 51 Regatta Bay, apartment 446, Annapolis, Maryland. I live in the area, and I also work in the area of the proposed medical marijuana dispensary, and I am in support of Bill 2418 as it is currently. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Andrzak.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the council. My name is Jack Andrzak, and I represent Pure Hannah Synergy, LLC. It is one of the dispensaries in District 21. It's currently looking in both Prince George's County and in Arundel County. It's a step, as I say, it's a stage 1 medical cannabis dispensary. We're opposed to Bill 2418 in large part because it places an unreasonable and unique limitation on the zoning commission. That is that it prohibits the use of any variance. As I'm sure you're aware, there are 64 provisions in the 64 entities in the special use exception uses listed, and there are, I believe, 55 in the conditional uses. It's 129 entities that are subject to zoning. None of those, not one that I could find, has a restriction on the use of a variance. And as all of you know, familiar with zoning, variances are very important when an entity is seeking to comply with the zoning code. It doesn't make any sense to us. It is particularly strange when you consider there's other uses include adult bookstores, adult theaters, bingo operations, carnivals, rendering plants, packaged goods stores, racetracks, pawn shops, and a lot more. You are singling out a single industry. I respectfully, on behalf of my client, oppose the bill, both as introduced and as amended. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Andrzejczyk. Appreciate your comments. Mr. Zablotny.
Yes, sir. Good evening. Mark Zablotny, 1050 Carriage Hill Parkway, Annapolis, Maryland. I used to be the president of General's Highway, and now we restructured, so I'm just on the steering committee. But we're an 8-member steering committee, and I represent tonight 4,100 households, about, I'm just saying, approximately 9,000 people. And we want the bill 2418 passed this structure without further amendment. We have no, of all those hundreds of emails I've gotten, not a single one said they were against medical marijuana, not a single one. But everybody doesn't like the location they're trying to get now at we're behind Open Path where Mr. Smith is. And it's a nightmare there now already with the General's Highway, with the intersection. It's a failed intersection. We just don't understand how they could put a dispensary there with all the traffic that's going to occur. I grew up in Linthicum. I've talked to friends of mine that are at the dispensary there. They said the line at 8:30 in the morning when it opens up is like 100 feet long. And I just don't think we can handle it. And we just want these people to please pick other locations. And as I said, please pass Bill 2418 as structured without further amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zablotny. Appreciate it. Ms. Johnson.
Julie Johnson, P.O. Box 6634, Annapolis, Maryland. I support the testimony from the people that have just testified in favor of the bill, but I do have a couple of other questions. I do hope that as you deal with this subject, that you will deal with tightening the requirements for chronic pain. For instance, I wound up being at a lecture, and a very enthusiastic speaker is really in support of this, and he was saying, well, if you had pain 2 days ago and you've got pain yesterday and you've got pain today, you've got chronic pain. So you can get, it's really easy for you to get a prescription. And my answer is no, that is really the kind of thing that a lot of us are really concerned about. I would also ask that as you look at the revenues that are generated from these businesses, I would hope that you would be requiring that some of the money be allocated to researching alternative species and other alternative treatments. For instance, the old treatment for these incredibly frequent seizures is PABA. And I read about that, it has to be 20 years ago in a Johns Hopkins publication. So there are other alternatives. Admittedly, that's not necessarily what everybody wants to use, but there are other species of cannabis that do generate an alternative oil that seems to be promising for relieving some of those kinds of medical issues. The third thing, or the next thing I want to do is support Mr. Walker with, if you're going to have some sort of an advisory group, you need the citizens. We are not dumb bunnies. We're the people who pay the bills, and the citizens know what needs to be done. So I would really hope that you would stand up and stamp your feet, or at least smile and be really firm. You must include the public in making some of these kinds of decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Is there anybody else who would like to testify? You folks are dismissed if you'd like, please. Anybody else would come down? I see Mr. Plott. Is there anybody else would like to come down? Please come down at this time.
Mr. Chairman, members of the council, David Plott. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Linnes and Blockers, offices One Park Place in Annapolis. I'm representing Open Path with respect to this bill, and again, requesting that you approve the bill as it is before you. I think the amendment that you made at the last council meeting to allow these uses in a business complex makes sense, so that's reasonable to move forward. The statement that this prohibition on variances is unique in the zoning code is simply not true. In fact, this bill is modeled on a similar prohibition on certain types of energy systems, wind energy systems. And also, I would say that even if it's unique, the use itself is unique. You know, irrespective of how you feel about cannabis, the fact is that the use is a felony under federal law, which is a rather unique circumstance. And if it is to be located in appropriate areas, the task force can address that, can encompass the different stakeholders in coming to a resolution. But again, you've expanded the area with the last amendment. We just request that you adopt the bill as it is before you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Platt. Appreciate it. We'll now close the public hearing. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill 2418 as amended.
Bill number 2418 is amended, an ordinance concerning zoning, conditional uses, licensed dispensaries, growers, and processors of medical cannabis, special exception uses, licensed dispensaries of medical cannabis.
Thank you. There's an amendment. Madam Secretary, please read amendment number 2.
Amendment number 2. This amendment adds a sunset date for the provisions regarding variances contained in the bill.
Thank you. Motion to adopt?
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Have a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. Mr. Walker, any discussion?
No, I think that Madam Secretary read the definition correctly. This just provides for a sunset provision on the bill at January 1, 2019, or when the task force or work group or whatever it is that the county executive has put together is finished and concluded their discussions.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Fink.
With this sunset, we're just waiting for the commission to put together their report. I mean, this could be, 30 days and the bill's dead. It could be 45 days and then this bill's dead. It just seems like, January 1st has some length to it, some longevity, but when you add that extra provision that once this commission's done meeting, it doesn't matter what the report says, once they're done meeting, the bill is automatically dead. I mean, this could be essentially be a 30-day window if we pass this amendment.
I appreciate that, Mr. Fink. Didn't seem like the administration was even familiar with when the meetings were going to be held, including when the first one was. So maybe they're anticipating meeting less than 30 days, but it didn't seem that way to me.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Fink.
With these commissions, I guess this is for the administration, can there be one meeting and the commission's done, 2 meetings and the commission's done?
We have 2 scheduled now. Again, I should have pulled up the calendar. I can do it as I talk. We have 2 scheduled now to hear from those who have been successful. I think they are getting heard first. Sorry, I'm trying to type as I'm doing this. And then the second meeting, I think, is scheduled shortly thereafter, so it could just be 2 meetings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I mean, if we need more time, we'll need more time. That's the way we've done with the APF group, is that it's been 4 meetings now. We're going on our 4th meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Grasso.
Yeah. Mr. Marsick, just so I can kind of grab the things. In the district that I'm at is like two spots that are open, I guess, for the marijuana thing. Does that sound about right?
Correct. There's 2 per senatorial district.
And so we have like this, Mr. Walker's amendment goes in. Then there's variances that can actually take place, I guess, before the fact or actually after the meeting. Is that what it is? When he has a sunset provision?
The variances could take place after this.
Which can also turn around and lead us into more places in North County.
Correct.
Because then it would turn around and possibly go after Mr. Fink's law that he passed a week as the council a year or so ago, that 1,000-foot. So we could turn around, we have the people applying to lessen that 1,000-foot by putting a sunset on this variance, right?
Correct.
Okay. So in other words, in North County, I don't think we need any more pot houses up in North County, if you know what I'm saying here. That's pretty much where I'm at. That's all I'm going to say. That's all I'm going to say.
That's enough.
And Senator German is probably watching.
Mr. Smith?
I did want to speak to the sponsor. in reference to that, the one line, until a report is issued by the task force on medical cannabis zoning to be established by the county, is the sponsor flexible on removing that line and extending the date?
Sure.
To like the end of
I mean, there's no
2019?
obligation for them to issue a task force either, task force report. So they could drag it all the way out to January 1, issuing the report. I mean, because there's not a actual citizen panel, it sounds like just people from the administration are going to be on it. They could issue the report whenever they want, which could be later in this year. They don't have to come back with something right away. So I left them a pretty wide window, I thought, but.
So is the sponsor okay with the current setup we have with the variances being issued by the administrative hearing officer?
Well, I mean, we're all signed on to this bill about variances.
Correct. Look, I would be flexible. As is, I'm not 100% on board with with that second sentence that's in there, and the date. I would certainly be willing to support an extended date, just because I know the next 6 months is going to be crazy.
So what date would you be willing to accept?
I don't know, the end of 2019, or at least July 1st of 2019.
Okay.
And I don't know if I want those things to be repealed at the end of that process.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Marzick.
Can I weigh in, or?
I'd like you to, yes, please.
Okay.
Would you like to weigh in?
Sure. Just to answer your question, June 4th and June 6th are the meetings that are set up for the first two meetings of this group. We'd ask you to oppose it. I mean, the purpose of this bill was to protect our communities that have been reaching out to us with major concerns. I mean, you heard from the folks on General's Highway. We've heard from folks throughout the county that the law that was a compromise bill that the council passed was being ignored repeatedly. We are trying to protect those communities with this. We think that we have a law that was a result of this compromise, and we think that we're a little surprised by the pushback now when we had, as you said, all 7 members of the council sign on to a bill to disallow variances. So we would ask you to resist this amendment and pass the bill clean as is tonight. We're trying to protect these communities who are concerned about the law being ignored.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Walker.
I'd like to withdraw the amendment. I've got another amendment being prepared in the back to accomplish what Mr. Smith suggested. So if somebody would withdraw the first and the second.
I think I made the second, which I will withdraw.
I think you did.
My motion first.
All right, so,
I'll rescind my second.
Madam Secretary, does that
Quick question.
require any vote or to allow? Okay, thank you. So it's withdrawn.
And Ms. Corby's in the back working on it now.
Right.
Mr. Smith?
The second piece to that amendment piece, would the sponsor be willing, because this could obviously be done with a separate bill as well, creating a repeal provision that you think is suitable for this process? I mean, it's the first time I read the actual amendment. That could be done in a separate action.
Sure.
Okay.
Mr. Walker, may I just ask, could you just characterize your overall reason for the amendment?
Because the administration is saying that they're acknowledging that there is issues with the way that the current law that we passed is structured. And they're saying that because they're hearing from the people who actually have the licenses that have complained about the way the thing is structured. And by the fact that they're setting up a task force, to me, acknowledges that they acknowledge that there's issues with it and that they're willing to study those issues. And so my intention was to allow them to study those issues and to come back with, assuming that this is typically what happens with work groups, and we've got one right now on the solar farm option that's in front of us now. We put a moratorium on solar farms for 8 months and have a work group that's meeting to generate a new set of regulations that are recommendations based on what this group is doing. So that was my impression and intent of what they were trying to accomplish. That they're setting up this task force with the acknowledgement that there were problems with the way things were structured, and that their intent was to come back with potential changes to that. And from my perspective, if they're going to we're making a change now before their task force has even met or finished or finalized their suggestions. So if the task force comes back with the suggestion that, oh, well, we also need to go ahead and make variances banned permanently, then that's a policy decision that this body would have to take up along with the other policy recommendations that came from that task force. So my suggestion was just to sunset what we're doing here and then wait to see what the task force comes back with and then adopt those changes after we've had the ability to have input from all the people who've been impacted by the licensing scheme that's in place and the zoning laws that we've passed up to this point in time.
Thank you for that. So what I'm understanding then, the first premise is that there's problems with the way it's currently structured, and
well, I didn't say that necessarily. I'm saying that the licensees have said that, and the administration is acknowledging it based on the fact that they're setting up this task force to study.
Got it. Okay. So then, can I ask Mr. Marza, could you comment on the administration's view of that premise? Is that premise accurate in your view?
The premise being that the law is flawed?
Yeah, that your appointing of a work group is an acknowledgement that there's something that needs to be changed. I'm not going to say flawed, but, well, problems with the structure, as Mr. Walker has.
I don't agree with this premise. I think we believe the law needs to be reviewed. I don't think we're acknowledging that the law is perfect. I don't think we're acknowledging that the law is flawed in any way. I think the law has been in place for roughly a year and a half now. We've seen that more than half of the dispensaries have achieved their special exception approval, more than half of them in the county. So it's obviously working for some. Others seem to be struggling with it. Again, in talking to the statewide, that I think we're basically on par with where other jurisdictions are coming online. I think there's a, rightly or wrongly, a big stigma attached to this business opening up. I heard today that there was one business, not in Anne Arundel County, in a different county, that had to meet with 46 different landlords before they got approval to do it because of financial reasons, because of the stigma associated with it. So it's not just the zoning provisions that are causing the problems, and we want to hear for those who haven't gotten their special exceptions, but we want to just review the law. It's something that we knew would have to be reviewed at some point. You all have added a provision in here that dramatically expands the areas in the northern part of the county that are now available under this bill. So there are changes that are being made incrementally, and we think it needs a wholesale review.
I appreciate that. Then can I just ask, how is that process that you're envisioning, how is that acted upon detrimentally? How's that hindered by this amendment, this proposed amendment of Mr. Walker's?
We don't think there should be variances to this law. I think in hindsight, we realize that that should have been included in the original law. We've seen that now. We've heard from many folks in the different communities that have reached out to us saying that the law was being ignored. I think my presumption was when all 7 members of the council signed on, they agreed that the law shouldn't be ignored, was why there was such strong support for it. We've never had a bill in the almost 4 years down here where everyone has signed on as a co-sponsor. And we wanted to make sure that that provision was adopted. I think this would go the opposite way. I mean, you have the option right now, right? You can vote for the bill and the variances are not allowed, or you can vote against the bill and the variances are allowed. So I'm not sure why you'd want to sunset that one provision.
Chairman.
Mr. Grasso, thank you.
What worries me in this situation is similar to the developer situation. We worry about a few developers crying that they don't get the things they want, and that might be 10 people to the thousands of people that they're going to affect. It is clear that in the North County, from the people I talk on a regular basis, door to door, that they are not fans of homeless shelters. They don't want methadone clinics. They don't want pot houses, and they don't want plasma centers. It's real clear to me. And I can't support anything that loosens the law up whatsoever that goes against what the people want in North County. How do I know that? Because I go door to door every day and ask them and hear the complaints. We just had an associating meeting for probably a good 100, 150 people there that are in outer space right now thinking that there was going to be a homeless shelter that was going to open up. So any one of those four things turns the people in North County upside down and they start yelling. So, you know, I'm sure the sponsor has good intentions in doing this right here, but I would talk to my colleague in District 1. I think it's a real bad move to vote for anything that has the word variance tied to it, because I've heard people in the Board of Appeals come to me and say to me, I don't quite understand why we go against the law, and I've made multiple arguments to some of the members on the Board of Appeals that the council has made a law, and that yet we, the Board of Appeals, are going to make adjustments to the law. So the point is, what do they need the council for anymore? Why don't the Board of Appeals just go ahead and make variances when the council made it very clear that there would be 1,000 feet? And so then we had one individual come in the line, and I think he put in for a variance of somewhere like 250 feet, when the law was clearly 1,000 feet. And so the question is, we're either going to adhere to the 1,000 feet, or we're going to start changing things all over again. And like I said, I am not going to support anything that has the word variance attached to a pot house, a plasma center, a homeless shelter, or a methadone clinic. And that's how I feel about things in North County. So
Thank you, Mr. Grasso. Thank you.
Sorry, Mr. What is a plasma center? I don't know what.
Donate.
Oh, don't ask. Okay.
I'll be more than willing to tell you.
Donating blood? You're against that?
Yeah.
I don't want to know. You know what? I received the question.
And the
I'm
people
sorry.
that do that, you can
I'm
see
sorry.
are definitely our high-end quality of society.
That's all right. That's all right. Let me review where we are. There was an amendment we were discussing. The amendment was withdrawn. There's a new amendment. So, Madam Secretary, please read amendment number 3.
Amendment number 3. This amendment adds a sunset date for the provisions regarding variances contained in the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Walker.
Motion to adopt, Mr. Chairman. All I need is a second.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Thank you.
Kelsey Kwong.
Is there any, Mr. Walker, anything you want to say?
Mr. Chairman, may I?
Oh, Mr. Marzik.
Just to be clear, this sunsets the variances, and the expansion of this continues on. So the other provision that was added in. So again, we would urge you to vote against this amendment.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Thank you. So I'm just reading this, and I want to be clear. So this takes away the or statement. So it's essentially a static sunset to July 1st. Correct, Mr. Wall? Okay. And so, Mr. Marzik, I presume with a full year lead time, and I think what the sponsor's intention here is that the work group would be able to bring forth recommendations. If there's a legislative component there, that would be a bill that would look more comprehensively at the provisions regarding dispensaries, and that could overwrite this at any time that came forward. So, but the administration is still opposing that.
What's that? Yes, we still are opposed to this. We don't think it's necessary. We have a bill that everyone is on board and agreed that there should be no variances to this law, and now it's being sunsetted out. So I don't think that's necessary.
I mean, I can't decide whether I agree with you or not, because I look at the no variance. I mean, I look at this as a pause, essentially, and now the task force is underway. So part of me thinks the sunset doesn't matter one way or the other, because if the task force does its job and comes forward to us, and then we'll have a larger debate on the zoning provisions instead of a narrow debate, which we're having right now. I would consider this a narrow debate. Variances or no variances. I think that considering what I've heard from my constituents over the one that was proposed in my amendment, or in my district, and several others, that we were due for a pause. So I guess the question now at hand is, do we unpause this at a certain time? You're arguing that that's not necessary. The sponsor, I think, wants that to happen.
Right. I would argue that's not a pause. I would argue that we're trying to make sure the law is upheld that was passed by the county council. That's the purpose of the bill, and that's the purpose of the disallowing the variances.
Right.
What this is doing is saying that we'll listen to the law for the next year, and then after that, it's okay, we can ignore the law again. We don't think that's a good policy. We think that you all, and we all worked very hard to pass a bill that is now the current law, and we think that law should be followed by those who are applying for these dispensaries.
Right, but you're also open to recommendations by the work group to amend that law, presumably.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, we supported the amendment you had in there to do it. Mr. Walker put forward a bill to open it up in different parts of the county. Anyone on the council can put in bills to add provisions in that would change the law.
Right.
I mean, you know, at any point you could do it. I don't think it's necessary to do a sunset in order to enact that. You obviously have the legislative power to do that at any point.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Marcic. May I have another question, Mr. Thank you.
Mr. Trumbo.
So, to my colleague in the first district, I was interested what you were proposing, or maybe you were thinking out loud, but you had said, could we do something with another legislative action? I'll yield my time. Yeah, please.
Mr. I think two parts. One, I see the premise of this amendment as twofold. One, the date, but two, almost like a forcing mechanism to ensure that the task force is actually doing its job. And I think that's what the sponsor is also doing with this amendment. So I'm not sure if you can provide some sort of reassurances that this isn't just a task force in name only, that there is a legitimate plan and process to review, from the administration standpoint, to review the policies that are in place to ensure that that there is access that is still allowed in specific areas, as well as come back with a meaningful document that says, yes, we did our due diligence and our homework so that we can fully implement this measure in a way that's safe for everybody. So I think, in my mind, I'm thinking, well, why would the Councilman submit this? And so I think the strongest piece is probably that forcing mechanism. The other thing for me that gives me pause, to use your term, is you know, I don't necessarily, I want the council to I'm not necessarily on board with no further action by the council, right? You know, I definitely want to be able to come at the end of this, say, and I know she's thinking of me smiling with the amendment again. I want to be able to say, well, I don't want it to end. I want us to interject. I want it to stop it before it ends, or some mechanism where it stops before, because quite frankly, I actually agree that if there's going to be a policy change to the dispensaries, that it should come from the council. I'm actually in agreement with that. That way we're held accountable for it and not some policy officer. That's my own personal sort of view on it, and why I had supported the bill in the first place. So that's kind of where I was on this whole process when I saw the amendment.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Pruski?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Tate, if you would, for the medical cannabis state law. First of all, I keep hearing that variances are granted. The last I checked, we have an administrative hearing officer, am I correct, that makes a decision on variances, and that personnel has changed?
Well, I guess what I'll say is the procedure for granting a variance to provisions within the zoning code is also part of the law for Anne Arundel County. And with few exceptions, for environmental reasons, there aren't that many prohibitions for granting variances. And yes, it is a case-by-case situation that the administrative hearing officer decides the facts, and there is a process for appeal through the Board of Appeals already. If you're asking me a factual question about, yes, we do have a new hearing officer than we had a few months ago. I don't know exactly what the question is.
No, you answered my question. The second one, just so we're clear, because there's going back and forth that there's going to be 75 medical dispensaries in the area. There's 2 per senatorial district, correct? Am I clear with that?
As well as the grower does get one. So for that would add, I think the Anne Arundel County is 9 is our total.
11.
11 for dispensaries.
Yep.
So I don't know. I mean, the state law does require compliance with the zoning code as part of granting of the license. I'm not sure what other.
No, you answered it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pruski. My colleague from District 3 hasn't said this yet, so I'm going to preempt him. But
I'm going to say it during my vote.
I was about to say it.
he never votes for any sunset provisions under the argument, the theory that you should either do it or not do it, or if you're going to do it and you have a reason to undo it later, then do it, then undo it. But don't enter into something with the idea that you're going to sunset it. If you're going to sunset it, then have your task force, I guess, and figure out what you want to do, and then do it. And I just for my part, I think the wisdom of that is impressing me at the current time. So I just like folks' thoughts on that, please, for what it's worth. Mr. Fink?
I agree.
Okay. I didn't mean to stop debate. Mr. Grasso has already said he's finished talking, so.
Yeah, I'm done.
Anybody else? Madam Secretary, please call the roll on amendment number 3.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer.
No.
I'm sorry.
No.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
No.
Mr. Grasso.
No.
Mr. Fink.
Nay.
Mr. Peruka.
No.
2 in the affirmative, 5 in the negative. Amendment number 3 is defeated.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Then, are we voting on the bill now? Then, please call the roll on bill number 2418.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
Mr. Fink.
Aye.
Mr. Peruka.
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Bill number 2418 as amended is passed.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Please read the title of Bill 3118.
Bill number 3118, an ordinance concerning parking rates, Whitmore Garage.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Well, this is the administration's bill,
Oh.
so I'll let them explain it, and then if I might, I would like a sentence or two of support
Thank you,
after
sir.
that. Thank
Mr.
you.
Marzick.
Sure. Mr. Chairman, members of council, Bernie Marzick in the County Executive's Office. With me at the table, Jason Fetterman from the Office of Law, and Christine Romans from Central Services. Whitmore Garage is owned by the county and jointly used under an agreement by the state and the county. Bill 3118 repeals and replaces the entire slate of parking charges, which last changed in 2009. The surrounding community has requested more affordable parking options in the area, and the garage is not fully used on the weekends. To address these concerns and help promote tourism and economic development downtown, this bill reduces the overnight parking rate on the weekends to just $2, reduces the daily parking rate on Saturday to $4, and reduces the parking rate on Sunday to $0. This bill also gives discretion to Central Services to abate parking rates during special events to assist with downtown parking shortages, which has been used in the past for Military Bowl, New Year's Eve, and other such events. This bill does not change the $1.25 hourly charge for parking Monday through Friday, the monthly rate, or the rate the county charges the state for its use of the garage. And I would just like to thank Mr. Trumbauer for his co-sponsoring the bill. We'd be happy to answer any questions council has.
Thank you, Mr. Trumbauer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to add my voice of support on this. So the genesis of this bill was the city of Annapolis and some of the community members in the vicinity of Whitmore reached out to me initially, and I said, look, this is something that the administration should really weigh in on, and I'm happy with what they brought down. And I will note that the blue letter estimates a modest revenue loss from these, but that doesn't take into account that it might attract additional people paying with some of the reduced rates at some of the times. So the free Sunday parking is specifically to help the community, a church that's right there, because they lost some of their parking and their folks literally can't park to go to church. So I thought this was a good way to work that out. So I'd ask for you guys' support. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Trumbauer. Any other discussion? Any questions? We will then now open a public hearing. If anybody would like to testify on this matter, please come down at this time. Seeing no movement, Madam Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill number 3118.
Bill number 3118, an ordinance concerning parking rates, Whitmore Garage.
Thank you. Is there any final discussion? Madam Secretary, please call the roll on Bill number 3118.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
Mr. Fink.
Aye.
Mr. Peruka.
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Bill number 3118 is passed.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Please read the title of Bill 3218.
Bill number 3218, an ordinance concerning zoning, correction of zoning violations, notice.
Thank you, Mr. Marzick.
Mr. Chairman, members of the council, Bernie Marzick in the County Executive's Office. With me at the table, Phil Hager from Planning and Zoning and Kelly Kenny from the Office of Law. Bill 3218 changes the method of how the county council members will be notified of the county's intent to correct a zoning violation, and it changes it to certified mail or by email. The bill also changes the time frame for giving a notice from 30 days to 10 days prior to taking these actions. We're attempting to speed up our community cleanup efforts throughout the county, and this will enable us to move more quickly. To complement this effort, you'll have seen in our budget that we have increased the demolition fund from $60,000 to $200,000 this year to help pay for these increased cleanups. And lastly, the Office of Law now asks for a court order to allow the county to clean up these properties in the first court order, which speeds up this process by at least 90 days. So we are trying to reform this process to clean up some of these properties throughout different communities in the county, and we hope that you will support this minor change, which will help us move more quickly.
Mr. Marzick, I have taken a tour to try to understand some of the problems that are being addressed by this bill, and could you or would somebody on the panel just describe the difficulties that are trying to be rectified?
Sure. I'll defer to Mr. Hager, but I think, as you know from, or Ms. Kenny as well, because she's actually had more experience in doing it. From our tour, we turned around. I picture, the properties that we visited and saw this are properties that have, half dozen refrigerators, washers, dryers in their front yard, overloaded with vacant or disabled vehicles in their properties.
Right.
And the idea would be that the county would be able to clean up those properties more quickly under this provision.
Right, and as you know, my sensitivity to this, to something like this, is that I'd like there to be some kind of line that between 16 refrigerators in the yard and a lawnmower that's not covered up like it's supposed to be. I'm just trying to make an example. I want to be certain that these are things that are done when all else has failed and it's a drastic situation.
Understood. I'll defer to Ms. Kenny on that because she's had much more experience with these situations.
Thank you.
For the record, Kelly Kenny, Senior Assistant County Attorney. As Mr. Marzick said, most of the intent of this bill is aimed towards the properties that have multiple unregistered vehicles and a lot of junk, not just one lawnmower that's on the property. I can tell you that the few that we have abated since we've gotten the authority under a bill that came before this council a few years ago have been properties that are almost covered with junk. There was one not too far from here that had, 2 feet piled of items on the property that had been there for 2 years. So it's those types of properties that we're aiming at for the most part after there's been multiple notices to the property owners, and we've gone to court against them at least once, and they're just taking no action to remove those things. So it's generally going to be a property with, there's not going to be a question as to whether it's junk or not.
And Ms. Kenny, one of the things that struck me as I looked at some of these yards that that had these problems, it seemed to me that this was a reflection that there's the person involved or the people involved had some issues, perhaps needed help as much as they might have needed anything else. So is is, I guess what I want to be, I want to feel good that there's, that this is not just making somebody's problem worse, but enforcement where enforcement is really necessary.
Right, and most of these people, like I've said, they've been told and asked several times before to remove the items. A lot of them will say that they'll do it, and then they don't do it. I know zoning enforcement will recommend different agencies or entities that can work with them and help them get those items off of their
So that is a
property.
part of what you would normally, that's standard procedure, that you would look for agencies or help to.
Well, I don't want to say that they look for agencies, but I know that there have been certain ones that I'm familiar with that churches have been involved or recommended to somebody, or they may say, if you need to sell your things or have somebody take your things, contact, these types of people, those types of things.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that very much. Mr. Gressa.
Maybe in the areas that you're at, you don't have the problem as much. But up in my neck of the woods, it's something totally different, okay? I remember I had one house over here in the Point Pleasant area, okay, that stunk so bad that you could smell the house 75 feet away because the whole yard was filled with feces, dog feces everywhere. Now, the people that I got live right next door to them are the perfect American family with the nice vinyl 6-foot picket fence, the built-in swimming pool, and don't bother anybody and want to go out into their backyard and just have a hot dog without smelling dog crap. And that's what they get to smell. And so I can appreciate, some people may have some issues, but sometimes these people, it's more than just issues, they're pack rats. And in Baltimore City, they've had a situation, and of course, their old previous governor started this thing called the Environmental Sanitation Enforcement Law. It's generated like $3 to $4 million in Baltimore City. Now, they have no interest in trying to correct problems. They just want the money. So let me tell you how it plays out in Baltimore City. You have a pile of dog feces in a yard, and an inspector comes by, it's a $60 fine, just for a pile. And they give you 30 days to clean it up. And if you don't, and they come back 30 days later, and if it's still there, they will triple that fine. And then, if it's still not taken care of, it automatically becomes a lien against your property. That's what goes on in Baltimore City. Grass is over 8 inches, if there's leaves coming out of your gutter, if someone puts the trash out. Unfortunately, like I tell a lot of people, the reason we got laws is because there's people out there that just don't have any respect for anybody. Because the general public will do the right thing, and we don't need laws. But when you put laws out there, because there's few that don't have respect for anybody, anywhere around them. And up in my area, in this situation, we have these houses everywhere that these people think, and I hate to pick on West Virginia, but think they're living in West Virginia, and it's okay if you're living in an open space. But when you're in proximity of other people's residence and other people's property, it is only fair to maintain the same quality that the rest of the neighborhood is doing. If you can't do that, then pack your stuff up and move. Otherwise, turn around, and you have a law come down here that allows the county to get in there in an expeditious manner to clean the mess up, that protects the rest of the other people there that have to live with this nightmare. It is only fair to the people that have their substantial investments that everybody is treated the same, and that there's not just one family that's going to make a nightmare for everybody else. Come visit my district, and I could show you a whole bunch of those places, and then you really understand the idea of what they're trying to accomplish here.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Grasso. Just for the record, I want to make sure that, from my standpoint, West Virginia is almost heaven.
Mr. Chair.
I didn't say that about Mr. Trumbauer. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to be clear. All this bill does is you can send us an email instead of a certified mail. It's only to the, and the time change, but it's only to the council offices. This isn't to the general public.
Correct.
Which this
is a provision I think Mr. Peruski put into the original bill when we had it to give notice to the councilmen, and I think it's 2018. We can send an email to you all, and you're all responsive to that. You'll be aware of that, but it's 10 days.
I saw, yeah, right, in the 10 days. And so, I mean, my question to you, if you have an answer, how frequent are these notifications?
I can answer that.
I mean, I don't recall getting a lot of them, which is the premise of my question.
I don't think you've gotten one. I know we've had one in 7 2 and 3, I think so far, maybe 4 also.
So you don't think I've gotten one, like?
In the last 3 years or so since we did the last bill? No. I don't
Okay,
think-
good, because I
I've been
was worried I was
monitoring-
missing something, but I just haven't actually gotten any. Okay.
I've been
Have you done a
overseeing-
lot in District 2? Because he seems to think that there should be a lot of those.
We have not done too many. It's been about 2 to 3 years since we changed the law to allow the county to take this action in these types of cases. Again, these things do take time. We're trying to cut that time frame down because, it starts with the initial investigation by enforcement and then the notice to the defendants, and then we go to court. And, so it takes a while to get down to that.
Yeah, it's like trying to remove a derelict boat. I mean, that takes forever, too. I
Right,
totally
and then,
understand.
we go to court and we get the court
Yeah.
order, and the defendants, some of them comply and then some don't. And then, when it's clear that they're not going to, then we're starting to go through some of those now and say, okay, it's time for the county to take action on those. So,
Well, I know the administration had previously brought some things to streamline the public notification process, and this is not that. This is
Right.
only to the council
This is only
offices,
to you. So
I'm
this-
okay with that.
yeah, and to answer your question, in the last 2 to 3 years, I believe we've probably gone forward and abated about 4 or 5 so far, but we're moving forward on a slew of them right now.
Thank you, Mr.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Gresso.
Yeah, and I'm sure, Mr. Trumbauer, you remember the county executive, maybe he brought up that they had I guess you want to call it a nuisance-type property to address situations where there was no money in there to do anything about it. And this is like the beginning step of turning around and funding these nuisance properties that the county can go in there after proper notification and clean the mess up and then put a lien against their tax bill or whatever needs to be done to clean the messes up. So this is like the basic part of expediting the process is where we're at, right?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. If there's nothing further, we'll open the public hearing. Anybody like to testify on this matter, please come down at this time. Ms. Johnson.
Julie Johnson, P.O. Box 6634, Annapolis, Maryland. I appreciate the fact that you recognize that there are people who have issues. It was nearly 20 years ago I attended an international conference, and one of the speakers happened to be from Harvard, and he was talking about the neurophysiology of stress, and that when people who live in poverty or surrounded by violence or with other assorted crises in their lives. Basically what happens in simple language is they have the fear hormone, adrenaline. And then this overwhelms other parts of the biological system. And for instance, one of the things they see happening with laboratory animals is that the nesting instinct, under prolonged stress, the nesting behavior absolutely falls apart because nest building and all the grooming and all the rest of these things are controlled by hormonal interactions or neurosecretory structures or chemicals and receptors, and those things are disrupted. And also about 20 years ago, there was a rash of things in some upscale neighborhoods in Montgomery County where there were some older citizens living in some older homes, and there were some real estate people who said, hey, these are some good properties, all we have to do is get those people out. And essentially, they went after these folks with this kind of legislation, and the people were yanked out of their homes and stuck into into senior care centers, and which resulted in the disruption, and basically they died in short order. These were elderly couples. So I hope that you will look at the biochemical and the neurological issues on something like this and be compassionate. And realize that that's, not everybody chooses.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Yes, ma'am. We'll now close the public hearing on Bill number 3218. Madam Secretary, please read the title of 3218.
Bill number 3218, zoning, correction of zoning violations notice.
Any further discussion? Madam Secretary, please call the roll on Bill number 3218.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
Mr. Fink.
Aye.
Mr. Peruka.
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Bill number 3218 is passed.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Please read the title of Bill number 3418.
Bill number 3418, zoning cosmetic facial hair salons.
Mr. Fink.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This bill, I had a constituent call me who moved into my district recently, signed a lease for a piece of property in a C2 district in a shopping center to do that cosmetic, to do the semi-permanent cosmetic makeup, and was only to find out that we don't allow that type of permitted use anywhere in the county. She contacted Planning and Zoning, working together with Planning and Zoning. They suggested that she contact me to put in legislation. That's essentially what this does. So this would allow that type of business in a commercial district in C1, C3, C4 is permitted. I do have an amendment to come up to fix a small error for C2 to make that permitted as well. These are not tattoo parlors. It's not the same equipment. It's a much less intense needle, I guess, going into the face, and something that is not permanent. Makeup only. Right now, I think we allow it in hair salons and spas and that type of thing, but her business was going to stand alone. So this is just a simple bill that I look at just improving our zoning code.
Thank you, Mr. Fink. Mr. Marzick?
We're supportive of the bill, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chair,
Thank you, Mr. Smith.
not that I'm opposed to it, I still don't know what cosmetic facial hair salons are.
Tattooed eyebrows.
Yeah, it's tattooed eyebrows.
Yeah, it's a new business. It's called
microblading.
Microblading.
Right.
So is that tattooing or is that?
No, it's actually started as treatment for people with cancer, and I think it's now become more regular.
Semi-permanent. You got to keep up with it or it'll come off, but it's not a tattoo.
Yeah, it can last up to 2 years. You put ink and fill in the hairs that are missing on your eyebrows.
Any questions, Mr. Trumbauer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in the original code, if I'm reading the bill right, hair and nail salons are only permitted as an auxiliary use in C2. What's the intent of that?
That's correct. The way the code was constructed dating back to the 70s, they wanted to reserve the C2 district only for office use.
I see.
But we did introduce retail uses into C2.
Sure.
And I look at this use as having no more impact than the uses that are.
Because just to be clear, the bill, in addition to the cosmetic facial hair, would also, well, I'll speak to that at the amendment, because that hasn't been introduced yet. I withdraw.
Is aligned with the other two
I got you, yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Then we will open the public hearing on Bill 3418. Anyone wishing to speak on 3418, please come down at this time. Seeing no movement, we'll close the public hearing on 3418. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill number 3418.
Bill number 3418, an ordinance concerning zoning cosmetic facial hair salons.
Okay, there is a technical amendment.
There is a technical amendment. One is technical.
I'm sorry, there is a,
There is a technical amendment, and then there's a substantive amendment. There's two.
okay, well, let's do technical amendment first, okay? Right? Madam Secretary, please read amendment number 1.
Amendment number 1, this technical amendment corrects a typographical error in spelling.
Motion to adopt?
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Second.
Any discussion? Madam Secretary, please call the roll on amendment number 1.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Yes, aye.
Okay.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Grasso. Mr. Fink.
Aye.
Mr. Peruka.
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Amendment number 1 is adopted.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Please read amendment number 2.
Amendment number 2. This amendment allows hair, cosmetic facial hair, and nail salons as a permitted use in C2 commercial districts.
Motion to adopt?
So moved. Second.
Thank you. Mr. Fink?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I sort of referenced this in my remarks. This just allows what I believe is an oversight when I approve the bill and allows a permitted use in C2 to make it consistent with all the commercial districts.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Trumbauer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, so now I can ask my previous question. So this also would bring hair and nail salons into C2, and I just want to confirm you're okay with
Right,
that?
currently they're allowed as an auxiliary
Yes.
use. Yes, we would be allowing them as a permitted use, and
Okay.
it would be less intense than some of the uses that are already permitted in the C2 district.
Understood. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I do have a
Mr. Smith?
So, quick question. At a tattoo parlor, could you have the same thing done, that same procedure done?
That is the reason why this bill is here today, because they were using a certain type of ink, but it wasn't permanent like tattoo. We considered it to be a tattoo and not just regular grooming like hair and nail.
Okay. Huh. Is it I mean, have you seen this blooming, this business sort of start to pick up here?
Yes, there's someone in our building that has it.
Oh, wow.
Had it done. It's about $500.
Oh, wow.
It lasts for about 2 years.
Looking forward to, I guess, going with the sponsor to the facility when they open.
You're going to get a touch-up.
Well, I'm not going to get a touch-up. I think my eyebrows.
Madam Secretary?
No touch-ups needed.
Madam Secretary, please call the roll on amendment number 2.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
Mr. Fink.
Aye.
Mr. Peruka.
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Amendment number 2 is adopted.
Thank you. Then this bill number 3418 will be heard as amended on what, on June 4th? 4th. Thank you. I said that so well. Okay, thank you, Madam Secretary. Please read the title of Bill 3518.
Bill number 3518, an ordinance concerning Board of Appeals and administrative hearings, restrictions, residential rezonings.
Thank you. Mr. Grasso.
Yep, another Grasso special. Basically, what's happened here is my continuing efforts to try to bring the development under control. And with this piece of legislation right here is clearly saying that if whatever you are zoned at, if an R1, you can go to an R2, but you can't go from an R1 to an R15 or from an R2 to an R22, because I don't believe that at any time the council makes those bad judgment calls. So we already have a moratorium on upzoning from now until the general development plan is being done. The fact of the matter is what happens after that. And so that's always my fear, that there's always that possibility again that someone knows somebody somewhere. And again, we have this issue that, the general development plan or comprehensive zoning comes into play and says, this is what we all agreed on. And then before you know it, some of our little lobbyists, who I won't mention, who aren't in here now, well, there's one of them, turn around and come in here and say, well, let me tell you what. They go before the Board of Appeals and say, the council made a mistake, okay? This should have been R15, but the council had it as R2. And so then what winds up happening is that if they can sell enough, ice cream to the Board of Appeals, that maybe the Board of Appeals might turn around and allow something to go from an R2 to an R15. And so what I'm trying to provide here is a check valve that says, okay, we are not stopping you from developing. If you are R2, you're welcome to develop R2. However, if that R2 doesn't work for you, when you come before comprehensive zoning again, which could be a month from now, depending where you come into the cycle. So let's say you had R2 today, all right, and you said, hey, I want to go to an R10. Well, then you would wait, 2 years until comprehensive zoning to seek that higher intense use. However, we're not stopping you from doing what you want to do now. You've already got R2. It's always been that way, and if you want to go longer than that, then you just got to wait your 2 years. Now, there's the other side, is that let's say if it's, 8 years down the road, let's say somebody goes to comprehensive zoning and they got R2 or R1, and the time goes by a week or two, and they say, hey, I want to go to R15. Well, then they're going to have to wait till the next comprehensive situation is done, and then, of course, they're going to solicit their council people or whoever to try to get this, to upzone. So I've seen enough examples and one is good enough for me. It doesn't have to be a whole lot, but I've seen enough examples where a piece of property goes from an R1 to an R15, which to me, I can't figure out how in the world it is. In fact, I can tell you the piece of property. One was on Long Hill Beach Road, okay, and I believe that property was R1, and the previous county executive put an amendment in and wanted to change it to R15 or R22, and the public came in an outcry and says, we don't want this. So the county executive turned around and put an amendment back in to take it back to where it was. And then what happened is the council wound up having a split vote, 3-3. One person recused himself. Now, under my law, assuming this council passed it, we wouldn't have to worry about that. They're entitled to one density increase. And I would ask the council, if you haven't been solicited by your constituents or drove on the road and see the development issues that we have, we don't need to put that out there anymore with any intense development. You got R1, go to R2. If you got 2, you can go to 5. You got 5, you can go to 10. But there is no justification in Anne Arundel County to go from an R1 to a 15 or an R2 to an R22. There's just no justification whatsoever. Okay? All that tells me is that somebody knows somebody or somebody's contributing to somebody's campaign, and this is a perfect safety valve to take place after comprehensive zoning. Of course, like I said earlier, the county executives already made steps to make a moratorium on all upzoning until the GDP is done. This is a safety valve after the fact. That's all I'm going to say.
Thank you, Mr. Grasso. Mr.
I'll let the administration go, and then I'll have a question.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Mr. Marzi.
Mr. Chairman, members of council, Bernie Marzi, the County Executive's Office. With me at the table, Greg Swain from the Office of Law, Phil Hager from Planning and Zoning, and Lori Rose from Planning and Zoning. We don't support this bill. We think that the current moratorium that you all passed recently obviously puts into place a stop to these upzonings administratively. But I think more important is that if there is in fact a change or a mistake that needs to be rectified, that if a property is an R1 and it should be an R5, then it should go to an R5. It shouldn't go to an R2, I think, from a zoning perspective. And I'll let Mr. Hager or Ms. Rhodes kind of expand more on that.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the council. For the record, Phil Hager, Planning and Zoning Office. I respectfully support many of the things that were brought forth in Mr. Grasso's comments. Unfortunately, I cannot support the bill as it's currently drafted. The process of change mistake is a longstanding practice that's based upon case law and longstanding land use practice. It's based upon the doctrine of change. And in that, you look at the most recently adopted rezoning, which in some cases is newer or older depending upon where you stand in the entire cycle. As you know, you recently adopted about a year ago a process where our comprehensive planning process, which we call the GDP in Anne Arundel County, was shortened to 8 years. So we are already limiting to some extent the age that our land use designations are going to have. At no time will they be older than 8 years. However, the idea that, and that is important because it's that which is used as the benchmark. In order to be granted a zoning change, whether it's an up or a down, you have to compare the last comprehensively zoned actions and find a way that was either a mistake or that there's been substantial change in the neighborhood. And certainly over time, change does occur, but that change also has to have been not envisioned by the plan. So there's a number of safeguards put in place there. We just adopted 2 weeks ago a moratorium on land use change, on zoning changes until the GDP is adopted. So we have a period of time now where the fears that Mr. Grasso has raised could not occur. We will then have a brand new land use element and a brand new series of comprehensive rezonings that follow. It will be extremely difficult for an applicant to bring a case to the hearing officer in a short period of time after that plan is adopted. So, because they would have to establish that there'd been some change. Well, not much change can happen in a few months. the change that occurs has to be something that's going to be demonstrable. It's going to have to be over a period of several years to make a case. The other aspect of that is that with greater emphasis, as required by state law, with greater emphasis on consistency with the land use article, and with greater emphasis on compliance with the land use element, of the GDP, it becomes increasingly difficult to make a case outside of the comprehensive rezoning process, except in extreme examples. So I submit that we really don't need to do this because I think the safeguards are already in place. And then if you are going to establish that a mistake was made, how can you predetermine what the limit of that mistake is? If you made a mistake, you made a mistake. Could it be a mistake that only involves an incremental change? Or was the mistake between residential and commercial, or commercial and residential? And Lori has some statistics that she can bring to your attention regarding some of those changes that have occurred recently. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Lori Rhodes, Planning and Zoning. I wanted to look at our statistics. We started tracking these cases in 1995, and I wanted to see how many instances there were that rezonings were approved by the administrative hearing officer or the Board of Appeals to go from a low-density residential classification to either a medium or high. And I found that of all the cases, 12 actually were a non-residential zoning classification that went from commercial to R15 or industrial to R5, which kind of builds off of what Phil Hager had said. When there's actually a mistake, this process gives you the mechanism to respond to it. So there were actually more rezonings that were approved to go from a non-residential district to a medium or high residential, and not in the reverse.
Mr. Chairman.
Well, Mr. Gressa.
Okay, that all sounds great, and I respect everything that you have to say, but it's a bunch of hogwash, okay? The fact of the matter is that this council drives around Anne Arundel County, and if this process has worked so well, then explain to me why we got development banging off the walls here, cars, traffic everywhere, if it's working the way it's supposed to work, okay? The council might clearly remember that I had a spreadsheet done on the last zoning officer. It showed all the cases that were upzoned, and there was 3 major parcels that went from an R1 to an R15, and without getting myself into a lawsuit, I think we know who the developer was. R1 to R15 in crowded districts. The thinking of some of the folks is that precedence is the word that we want to use here. So if a neighborhood is zoned R5 or R10 and people are climbing over top of each other and there's traffic everywhere and someone has R1, that it's okay to go to R10 or R5 because the nightmare is already here. Let's just go ahead and continue the nightmare. And that's the thinking here. That's what scares me more than anything over here, because the problem is already here. Let's make it worse, okay? I can tell you, and Councilman Fink, if he wants to chime in, his district is a mess, okay? And it butts right up to my district, and it's his people that come through my district that the cars are lined up all the way down the road. And they're the phone calls that I'm getting, okay? That's the problem. You would think in his particular district, there's nothing left in mine, but anything in his district, we wouldn't allow any upzoning whatsoever. Nothing. If it's R1, it stays R1. And if it's R1, we'll feel good about you and maybe give you R2. We wouldn't even allow that, okay? But we do. Why? Because we use the word precedence. Well, Councilman, if they're already R5 and already 10 there, so that's what's already there. Okay, so we've made a screw up as a government, and we're going to continue that screw up. This legislation doesn't allow that to happen. It takes it one class up. That is it. I've brought before this council the chart and showed you 3 particular times that it went with one developer alone, went from an R1 to an R15. But yet I showed you on that chart how the mom and pop operations were denied an upzoning. They were denied it because you know why? They didn't have enough money to put in certain people's pockets. That's what the real problem is. And we all know in this council how this all works. And we sit here and deny that, we're kidding ourselves. Okay? This is a check valve. And that's what I'm asking for, a check valve after comprehensive zoning. I know Mr. Fink's going to have something to say anyway, but go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Gressa.
Mr. Chairman.
Did the administration want to respond?
I would be happy to share my statistics to show you.
Well, I got the spreadsheet. Ms. Tate, excuse me, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Tate did the spreadsheet for me, and I showed it to the whole council.
I got it from this.
Okay. And there was one individual on there that did 3 upzonings from R1 to R15 in congested areas. True? In fact, the zoning officer right there made the case for me. I only had 2 on the paper. He said, oh, don't forget about this other one.
Yeah, there was one application with 2, there was actually one application for 2 sites, so actually there were 2.
But that's under him.
And that property was surrounded by commercial
Okay.
and high residential.
Now, on Long Hill Beach Road, right in the border of my, and the only reason I'm bringing up Mr. Fink here because we share the same traffic. And right on Long Hill Beach Road, right where the dividing point of my land is from his land, is the developer was able to go into that piece of property, tie up that piece of property and say to them, I'm certain the conversation was, listen, I'll buy your property for X amount of $1 million, providing I get the zoning change from an R1 to an R15 or 22. I guaranteed you that's the conversation. And you know what happened? He went to the Pryor County Executive Leopold and got it upzoned to a 15 or a 22. And there's 15 acres back there. Then it caused so much ruckus that we went to turn around and drop it back down. The County Executive Leopold put an amendment in to take it back down. I walked that whole community up there on Long Hill Beach Road and told those people what was coming their way. The people in Sun Valley, again, right across the street from where he's at, because we share B&A Boulevard, they were outraged. If this bill was in play, it would have never went from an R1 to an R15 or 22, whatever it is. Would have never happened. And if anybody doesn't think Sun Valley's congested, I invite you to take a ride down there and see for yourself what the people go through. And as you keep going up B&A Boulevard, you'll get blessed by the traffic coming down Marley Neck Boulevard. Same thing, same thing. I just got the teacher off the phone, burning my phone up on Sunday, telling me how overcrowded the classrooms were. I told everybody that Marley Neck Boulevard was a wrong move. We should have never upzoned that to R5s, 10s, and 15 there. And now the traffic spreads all the way down Marley Neck Boulevard, goes across B&A, all the way across the bridge and on the Ritchie Highway. And I got to get these phone calls. What are you guys doing down there? Why is all this development? The schools can't handle it. We're creating our own problems over here. Because more houses produces more kids, requires more schools, more traffic, more everything. And it's all about a developer being able to upzone several times so they can make some more money so they can hoard the land. That's really what it's about. They make the little money and they walk away and they leave me, whether he wants to commit to it or not, and everybody else deal with the mess that they've left.
Let's see if he commits to it. Mr. Fink.
Thank you. I just want to put for the record that my district's far from a mess. We have some traffic. We have some traffic in Pasadena, but that's more to the one way in and one way out on 2 different peninsulas. Just a couple comments on Mr. Grasso's comments. You know, that same developer that you referenced, and I don't want to get into defending any one person over another, but I know he's denied many times also. In fact, in my district just recently, he was denied on a project that the whole community was supporting. Everything around the piece of property the community was supportive of, and he was still denied. And in addition, this bill doesn't seem to, and maybe I'm reading it wrong, doesn't apply to comp rezoning. So the scenario of Long Hill Road doesn't go with this. That scenario would still happen.
That was a prior situation that had this bill been in play back at Long Hill Beach Road would have never happened. This bill is to address upzoning after comprehensive zoning that you're only allowed to jump one density.
But Long Hill Road happened during comp rezoning, so that would have still happened.
Yeah, because this bill wouldn't have been in play.
Even if this bill was in play.
Well, I'm going to be honest with you. I really don't remember if it was. Yeah,
it was comp rezoning.
Yeah, it had happened during comp.
So the scenarios that you lay out are during comp rezoning, which this bill does not.
That's correct.
Does not play. And when you get into the actual administrative hearing, and just for the credibility of what the folks at the desk do, I think there are a lot of scenarios, and in that same spreadsheet that you spoke about, we saw scenarios where the individual you're referencing, as well as many other individuals, were denied. Some of the big name guys, as well as the mom and pops, were denied. So, I do think there is a process in place that does work. It shows that even when the community's behind a certain project, if they can't show a change or a mistake, that the county still denies it, even with the support of the community behind it, because I do think the county sticks to that change or mistake. And I think many times we can look at some of these properties and say it wasn't a mistake, but most times we can say, hey, there was a lot of change in the area. Whether we like that change or not, that change happened because of us, because of the prior council. You take the Long Hill property, for instance, the council before us rezoned some property that then made Long Hill Road possible, because the property around it was all of a sudden upzoned to comp rezoning before that. So it just seems like the administrative hearing isn't the issue, because there are safeguards in place, that a lot of this issue is being done by the council, if you do consider that an issue.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Gresso.
First of all, I respect what Councilman Fink said, okay? But when people are put into a corner, that's what was done in his district. You either pick this or this. It's the less of two evils. I don't want to go out of here thinking that your people in your district were cheering for this change. They had to pick the least of the worst of what choice they had to make, okay? I know very clearly what's going on in that district, because I spent time campaigning trying to take out the guy that's in office now, all right?
For the record.
Yeah, not him, for the record. So I know what's going on over there. The Long Hill Beach Road deal, okay, the same developer that got these R-15s was able to pull that deal off, okay? And that really was a mistake by the county executive, Leopold, for allowing that to go through. And then there was Councilman Courtesy that was involved with that deal, and that's how that deal actually went through, okay? Because Councilman Courtesy was given. Nobody in their right mind would have supported that deal. That's where it's at.
Thank you, Mr. Gresso. Mr. Trumbauer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just so as I read this bill, there's no additional context in the code, and I know you spoke, Mr. Hager, about just the change. Is this only affecting the change provision, I mean the mistake provision, or is it change and mistake?
The doctrine of change and mistake would be affected by this proposal.
Okay, and we are currently, thanks to the legislation we passed recently, there is a moratorium on residential upzonings, and that goes through, I forget what date we made it, but that was the amendment we worked out that I very inarticulately tried to explain that one meeting.
I only remember you being articulate.
So one other question. Well, actually, this is to the sponsor. So are you worried at all that if we pass this, there will be a perception that the council would be generally okay with a rezoning of up to one? So like right now, we don't speak to that, and I think a lot, I mean, judging from Ms. Rhodes' testimony and others have said, a lot get denied. But if we pass this to say you can go, from R1 to R2 and vice versa, are you worried that that sets an expectation that the administrative hearing officer would say, well, the council's okay if you just go up one, so that he or she may reject less? It just occurred to me.
My thing is that it's a safeguard, because not to take away anything from Mr. Ager over here or the zoning officer, but that's only one person. We're 7. And when comprehensive zoning comes down, there's at least 4 of us that got to be convinced. And he's just one person that's got to make a decision. And if the person doesn't like that, then it goes to the next person, who is one person.
Well, he doesn't make the decision, the administrative hearing officer does,
right? They can turn around and say no, and then it goes before the officer, and he could turn around and say no, and then it goes to the Board of Appeals.
Right.
Which I'm comfortable with, because now there's 7 people.
Which we appoint one.
Right, exactly. So I just don't feel comfortable with, not saying he's not doing a fine job, but I just don't feel comfortable with one person looking at things and then the person behind him looking at things. I'd rather there be multiple eyes looking at things. And that's what my fear is over here. You're putting the whole county on him. And sometimes, like Larry Tom, if you work that man hard enough, you could probably get what you want, okay?
I don't think Mr. Tom would agree with that.
Yeah. No, let me finish what I got to say, okay? I'm choosing my First Amendment right over here, okay? The bottom line is that if you pound somebody hard enough, finally they could just throw their hands up in the air, and that's what can happen. This legislation doesn't allow that to happen, and if they do weaken they can only step one category of density. That's the check valve behind it, the beauty of it. That's what I'm saying.
I respectfully disagree.
Mr. Chair?
Just a second, Mr. Walker.
Mr. Grasso, the bill as it is structured, it just addresses the residential districts. So there's no objection on your part if somebody wanted to change from, like, I don't know, RA to commercial 3, C3 or C4 or C2?
I'm fine with that. The problem we have here, Mr. Walker, you're well aware of, is the population growth, that the explosion that I like to call it in Anne Arundel County. And that's what I'm trying to control, is the growth. I am great with businesses, okay? We need those, you know we need those, and they provide the jobs for the people that are living here. I just don't want to see this thing get worse than what it's getting, and I think a check valve of one density allows the person to do what they want to do, and if they want to go up an extra notch, they can do that, okay? But that's where they're at. And I just prefer that, you know, transparency. It's better that 7 of us look at it than one person, and then maybe the next one person, and then eventually gets to the Board of Appeals, which is all, as you said, or Mr. Trumbauer said, all appointed by us to have our views.
Sure.
I think it's just a safety valve.
Yeah, I appreciate your comments. I don't know how familiar you are with the commercial zoning districts, but they also allow residential units. And in fact, some of them allow high-density development, in fact, which is one of the issues that we've heard about recently down in my district. So I've got a couple of parcels that are zoned commercial at the entrance to Crofton, and there was some folks down here testifying recently about that, and they're townhomes and 2/2s and a mixture of other, not just commercials allowed in commercial. So I didn't know if you'd considered or contemplated that in your.
No, but if you would like to put an amendment in on that, buddy, I'm all with it, because I'm with that. I don't have that much problem up in my neck of the woods because they've pretty much developed everything that's up there, except a few big swats. But everything else is done. But if you want to put an amendment in it, absolutely. I'm just trying to provide a safety valve, because not that I don't think he's doing a fine job, I just don't want everything put on him, and I don't want the next person put on him, and then I'm okay when the Board of Appeals hits it, but it's just too much riding on him and the next guy. That's my problem.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Hager.
I would like to clarify something here at this time. When an application for a rezoning comes in, it goes to the Office of Administrative Hearings. My office, ably staffed by our zoning administrator, Lori Rhodes, and her team reviews that and provides a recommendation to the hearing officer. I do not make the decision on any rezoning case or any special exception case or any variance case. That's the administrative hearing officer. I believe we have a person in office who, in that particular role at this time, who believes in the rule of law and is going to interpret the code properly, and will be looking very carefully at the recommendations that my office provides to him in these particular instances. I think that we've gone here recently with a number of different things to increase the safeguards, including increase the notice requirements, increasing the distance that needs to be provided for both rezoning hearings as well as special exception and variance hearings. These are safeguards that are helping us to ensure that there's greater transparency, and there's an opportunity for the people of the area who feel that they're affected positively or negatively by an application to participate in that process. So I think many of these things that we have done are steps in the right direction, and they are going to be providing us with safeguards. But at this time, I'm gravely concerned about the constitutionality of this provision in terms of a person being able to pursue a change in the zoning that they feel is available to them under the law, a long-established law that's not only an Anne Arundel County law, but a state law as well. And if they're going to choose to try to prove change or mistake, then they have an opportunity to make their case. They may or may not be successful, but how can we predetermine that the universe is limited by us sitting here tonight to what the extent of change might be, or what the extent of that mistake might be? And all of these decisions are going to be decisions that are coming through this body, through your approval of the land use element of the GDP, and then later, when we do comprehensive rezoning, okay, This is one of the concerns I had a few weeks ago when you voted down the bill that was going to require consistency with that land use element. Tonight, you're telling us that we need to have safeguards in place and that our zoning and our land use need to be consistent. Now you're telling us that it doesn't matter. Which one is it? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Hager.
Okay. Mr. Hager, what department do you head up?
The Office of Planning and Zoning, sir.
Okay. And the people that you're referring to, like Ms. Rhodes there, how many people are there that make this decision?
How many people in?
Yeah, when
they don't make
Ms.
decisions.
Rhodes
We make recommendations.
Recommendations. How many is there?
Non-binding. There are 5 of us.
Okay. Who do you work for, sir?
I work for the citizens of Anne Arundel County,
And you're appointed by who?
the county executive.
Okay. And who is the boss over top of Ms. Rhodes?
I am.
Okay. And the other 5 people?
That as well.
Okay. So if you tell them to do something, they're going to do it, aren't they?
I wouldn't think that they would.
That's a yes or no question. If you tell them to do something, are they going to do it, yes or no? Simple, yes or no.
It's not simple.
Oh, yes, it is. Because, let me ask you again, who is the department head?
I am.
Okay. Do they work for you?
They do.
Okay. So if they don't do what you say you're going to do, it's insubordination, yes or no?
No.
So in other words, what you're telling me is that you're not in charge of the department.
When it comes to an ethical dilemma.
That's not what I said.
Mr.
Chairman.
No, Mr. Grasso, you're going to retain the floor, but let's just take it down a notch.
I am taking it down a notch.
Right.
Who runs the department?
Okay. I do.
Okay. Who do they work for?
Me.
Do they do what you say, yes or no?
No, we do what the code.
Excuse me?
We follow the law.
Excuse
and the
me?
code.
Excuse me? I didn't ask for you. I asked Mr. Egger. Do they work for you, yes or no?
They do.
Okay. And if you tell them to do something, will they do it? I didn't ask if it was legal or not. Well, assuming it's legal, will they do what you tell them to do?
I don't think so.
Wow. So in other words, what I've got here is I got a zoning department that does what they want to do, and there is no department head. Is that what you're telling me?
No, I'm not telling you that.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Fink.
You know, Mr. Hager, I appreciate that, and it sounds like to me that your style of leadership is not to have a bunch of yes men and yes women under you, and I commend that. So
thank you.
I think that's a very good thing. And, you know, Mr. Grasso, I think there's some leaders that only want to hear people tell them yes, 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 and I think there's some other leaders that like to have different opinions and hear the full story, and it sounds like Mr. Hager's on the second side of that. So I think that's very respectable, and, you know, I'm glad you're heading planning and zoning. And Ms. Rhodes, I think it's very commendable that you stepped up and say that, hey, you're going to do what's right, and it doesn't matter what your boss is telling you, right is right. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Fink. We're going to go to the public hearing in just a second, but Ms. Rhodes, I passed over you a moment ago. Do you have something you wanted to be heard?
No, I think it was accurately covered. It's what the council decides to do with the land use map when it's adopted that we have to follow, and mistakes are made, and the application of rezoning allows us to properly respond to those mistakes and changes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Chairman.
Mr. Grasso.
Once again, were you the same group of folks that was involved with that zoning change for that one particular developer that went from R1 to R15?
Yes, and that's the property that I referenced that was surrounded by C3 and other high-density
But
zoning.
there was 3 properties like that, and there was another one that went from R1 to R10 in the Pasadena area. Was you the same folks that were involved with that?
I'll have to check my chart to make
I'm sure you were.
To make sure that is the.
But Mr. Grasso, you can't
all I'm
ask the
gonna say,
question
Mr.
and
Chairman.
answer it, okay? So, all right. Thank you very much. And I thank all of you. We'll now open the public hearing on Bill number 3518. If anybody would like to testify on this matter, please come down at this time. Good evening, Mr. Platt.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman.
It's on now. David Plott, I'm an attorney at law firm of Linnos and Blocker in Annapolis, also on the board for the Building Industry Association. I think that Mr. Green thought he couldn't be here tonight, but he had provided you with his thoughts. I would just hand out something to you to give you some thought with respect to, we're only talking about administrative rezonings. There aren't a whole lot of them. I think Mr. Grasso was referencing mainly legislative comprehensive rezonings. And the standards for the administrative rezonings are pretty strict. You have to show change or mistake. You also have to show that what is being proposed to the hearing officer or the Board of Appeals conforms to the general development plan. So you have to show that there is conformance to the general development plan, and also there has to be a finding by the hearing officer that there's compatibility between the uses of the property as proposed to be reclassified and the surrounding land uses. So there are very high standards that apply to any administrative rezoning. But it does require GDP consistency, and I think this bill actually runs counter to the state enabling authority, because the council is supposed to adopt legislation that furthers and is consistent with the general development plan. That's under the state land use article. So as an applicant, if they have to show that they're consistent with the GDP, for example, if the property is say the GDP shows that it's medium density residential, but there was a mistake and it was zoned lower density, you can't comply. You can't, if you're only allowed to go up one step from R1 to R2, and the GDP shows that it's medium density, which is like an R10, because that's where the council wants growth to occur, you can't comply with the law, and you're contrary to the State Enabling Act of GDP consistency. So it makes no sense to adopt this bill. And as referenced by the administration, you've already put a lot of safeguards in place with the moratorium and additional notice. So I would just ask that you deny this bill.
Thank you very much, Mr. Platt. Ms. Johnson.
Julie Johnson, P.O. Box 6634, Annapolis, Maryland. To be pretty superficial, I really think that I'm asking you, as you make your decisions about how you're going to vote on this bill, please remember the number of incidents or the number of bills that have been before you in the past where this chamber has been packed with your constituents who are saying, we oppose this additional development because of the following reasons. For instance, the roads are not adequate. There are safety issues. We bought in this neighborhood because we liked it the way it was, and what you're doing in this change is altering what this community has been and what we thought we bought to something radically different. And I will just give you one example of like General's Highway. It's a scenic highway, except that when you turn right at the mall, there you've got, very soon you have the water tower, and then you have the new assisted living building that is absolutely overwhelming. This is not what most people view as being, a scenic highway. Plus, people said they really didn't want this high intensity. Plus, they then had to pick up the tab for sewer and water, and they're going to have to pay for additional road widening, and it spirals. And I know that all of you know all of these things, so that I would ask you to think about the fairness to your constituents, because what you decide changes the county virtually forever in the future. It's not just somebody signed a piece of paper. It's that the massive building sitting there on General's Highway is going to be there. The ugly water tower is going to be there when it could have been a different building providing one kind of service in addition to housing for veterans, disabled veterans.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. We will now close the public hearing on Bill number 3518. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill number 3518.
Bill number 3518, an ordinance concerning Board of Appeals and administrative hearings, restrictions, residential
Any
rezonings.
final discussion? Madam Secretary, please call the roll on Bill number 3518.
Mr. Pruski.
No.
Mr. Trumbauer.
No.
Mr. Walker.
No.
Mr. Smith.
No.
Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
Mr. Fink.
No.
Mr. Peruka.
No.
1 in the affirmative, 6 in the negative. Bill number 3518 is defeated.
Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill 3618.
Bill number 3618, an ordinance concerning zoning, commercial districts, farm equipment sales, and service facilities.
Mr. Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you know, I represent the southern part of the county, which is predominantly contains the large majority of farms. And in talking with several folks, and after hearing that the county executive's agritourism committee supported this particular change, I put forward a bill to make this change in the zoning code. I understand since that time, just found out over the past 3 or 4 days that the Farm Bureau in the county had a few concerns with the bill. One, they would have liked to seen the bill applied countywide. And I understand their questioning of that. I limited this change to south of 214, where most of the farms are located, and so I'm sure they're not thrilled about that. They would have liked to seen it, like I said, countywide. The other change that they had suggested was that they felt like there needed to be a definition with regards to farm equipment, and so I understood. Again, this was just conveyed to me within the last couple of days, so I was unaware of these and didn't have time to prepare an amendment for the farm equipment definition, but I understand and understood at that point that the administration had an amendment to make coming up, and I'm sure we'll deal with those when we get there, but to add something to the bill, which would have given me time to draft up the definition of farm equipment or ag equipment. So with that being said, we'll deal with the amendments when they come, but I would just ask for your support of this concept. I think we need to have the ability to have places where farmers can purchase their equipment and also where they can get it serviced that's local and convenient for them. So with that, I just ask for your support and look forward to hearing what questions you all have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marzick.
Mr. Chairman, members of the council, Bernie Marzick, the County Executive's Office, with me at the table, Greg Swain from the Office of Law, Phil Hager from Planning and Zoning, and Lori Rhodes from Planning and Zoning as well. We had planned originally to offer amendments tonight, as council has them. We've actually been asked by the chair of the Agritourism Agriculture Commission if we could hold this bill tonight so they could actually consider the legislation. I know they had sent a letter recommending a text amendment, but they haven't reviewed this text amendment, so we would hope that we could just hold this bill for 2 weeks. I think they will be or not 2 weeks, but until the next council meeting, I believe they meet between then. And I believe Ms. Cheney is here, who is the chair of that commission, but we'd like to have them actually review this bill. I think we have 2 changes that address what Mr. Walker was talking about with the concerns with the bill, but we would like to get the feedback from that commission now that they've had opportunity to actually see the language in the legislation. Mr. Hager has been involved with this issue for several months. I know they've expressed concerns about having a text amendment for this specific issue, and we expressed that to the Agricultural Commission, but I'll let him add to that, and we are willing to kind of work through this with the commission and see what their thoughts are, and then provide feedback after that if the council is willing to hold this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Marzick. Mr. Hager?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Bernie. What Mr. Walker says is true, that the genesis for this came about, at least from a formal perspective, from what transpired at the Agritourism Commission meeting. And there is some level of support, I think, on some of the members of the commission, but we don't know if they have that same level of support for this bill. So I think it would be appropriate that we provide them an opportunity to do that. Their next meeting is on June 4th. Which is, I think, the same day as our next council meeting. So asking that this bill be held until then, I don't think represents a significant hardship. I would, since I do have the microphone for just a moment, I'd also like to lay out a different course of action for you to consider as well, and that is that we've been speaking an awful lot of late and considerably this evening about the issue of zoning and the intensification of uses, and how we are relying very much upon the actions that we're going to be taking place at all levels of this government in terms of the development and implementation of the General Development Plan. Essentially tonight we're talking about rezoning a property, not through an actual administrative rezoning change, but through a text amendment. But the impact is the same. We're talking about an intensification of a use that's going to affect, if this becomes countywide, more than 100 individual commercial properties and multiple hundreds of people who are going to be affected, who are the adjoining property owners. An analysis is begging to be done of what the impact of something like this is or could be, and I think that the best place to conduct such an analysis is through the development activities associated with the general development plan. So I would like to ask that you would not shelve, not get rid of, not terminate this issue, but rather defer it to the analysis portion of the general development plan activities, and we know that that process is already ongoing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hager. Mr. Pruski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Hager, for sharing that information. I guess I just have a question then. So, like, would some of the additional analysis and discussion be that this be a special exception, or I'm just trying to figure out what would be other options? You know, I'm thinking about the course of what would fit with this. In terms of why it's there or why it's not there, I'm just curious.
Well, this use is currently something that's typically reserved for the C4, but what this proposal is that we open it up to all commercial zones that are larger than a half an acre in size. There's a reason why we have segregation of uses, and we direct those uses to certain zoning districts. There's many aspects about those different zoning districts that makes a certain use applicable or not, appropriate or not, in a given location. And it's also the means by which we make assignments of those same zoning codes in different parts of the county based upon different conditions. So what we have now is decades worth of tradition and custom where these uses are put in certain places, and now you're asking that we would be looking at these in the context of all commercial zones. So that's a pretty significant change that you're asking for, and it may very well be an excellent idea and something we definitely want to do, but the analysis to come up with that isn't something that's going to happen in the course of a 2-week period of time like we typically deal with when we're looking at bills like this.
Well, and one follow-up, growing up in a rural area, I mean, I know there's agricultural repair, and there's different volumes of business, you know, from what, you know, you could have 10 pieces on your property, and then, you know, they're waiting for repair. So we don't define the intensity either, do we? Is that another thing that needs to be clarified? Because I think that's one of the questions that came up.
Well, we certainly need a definition of what constitutes farm equipment. Yeah. Clearly, there's a huge difference between the equipment that's utilized in construction or mining or other types of things versus those that are associated with agriculture.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Walker, did you want to?
Yeah, I was just curious. Mr. Hager, I'm assuming you've been to these Agritourism Commission meetings?
I have.
All of them, or?
All of them.
Okay. And the one where this topic was discussed, it's my understanding there was a letter issued. Do you know do you recall what the vote was in support or oppose or opposition to the concept of having farm equipment? And in particular, as I understand it, the property was actually even discussed, the specific property that would be impacted.
Well, I hope that we're not writing this bill for one individual property because that's highly inappropriate. We don't make zoning changes on the basis of an individual property.
Okay, I'm not referring to that. I'm just saying that in the committee that the county executive established, you were there, and there was reference to a specific property in front of that committee, was there not?
There was, yes.
Okay, and the concept of farm equipment sales and repair was what was discussed, was it not?
Yeah, and there's other members of the commission that are here tonight to provide testimony.
Okay, and what was the vote on whether or not they supported this concept?
The vote on that concept, I believe, was unanimous.
That's what I understood as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. There's been a suggestion here about holding the bill. Is that something you would
public hearing first?
Yeah, we have a public hearing coming up, Mr. Chairman. I'm fine with moving forward with that, but I mean, if administration wants to hold it, that's fine with me.
I'm informed that we have to have the hearing. Well, we want to have the hearing. We will have the hearing now. We'll open up the public hearing on Bill number 3618. Anyone who wishes to testify, please come down at this time. Good evening.
Good evening.
Sir, would you like to begin? I don't think I have a sign-up sheet. Sir, you got to the table first, so you're up.
Thank you, sir. Okay, I'm David Riggs. The property in question was 5911 Southern Maryland Boulevard. I also am a resident in Anne Arundel County as well, and my address is 240 Farmhouse Lane, Lothian, Maryland. I live in an RA zoning property. We've been farming for, I don't know, maybe 20 generations. It's been a farm in the family for a long time. And what I would like to do is, I've spoke with a lot of folks in the community and asked, there's no one around here that sells used agriculture-based equipment. The definition of C1 zoning is a zoning that's for the residents of that community. Now, in most instances, C1 zoning in a lot of areas, when Jerry and I were speaking about this when he amended this bill, we're taking consideration that this is per district or our area. We're rural agriculture. There's a lot of agriculture practices in our community. There isn't up in the northern end of Calgary and northern end of this county and other areas, and there's no place to do it. There's no C4 available. I can't find any. I'd be willing to buy it. There was some. The county bought that right in Wace's Corner. There was left over there. There was a piece of C4 up there. It was purchased by the county. So being a small business, wanting to do things the right way, I want to be able to service the agriculture community. I want a community-based business that's going to promote having kids could come here and work on in the summer and do things like that instead of working at McDonald's. There's a lot of things. I don't really need this as a major source of income. I think it's a good thing for the community. So, I guess it's, I have children. All the people have children. I don't know.
Finish your thoughts, sir. Go ahead,
Okay,
please do.
thank you. I appreciate it. And I'm not a professional speaker, and nor am I an attorney, and this is the first time I've ever been here. But Mr. Walker shared my passion of what I wanted to do, and I understand that they amended the bill and there's some things that they want to change with it, and I'm okay with that. But I want to also definition, we are actually a farmer.
Right.
We farm. So I'm a little bit more familiar with what farmers need to buy and what they need to maintain their farm in than somebody that may be up here that's not a farmer.
Thank you. Appreciate your testimony, sir. Thank you very much.
All right.
Ma'am?
Hello, yes, my name is Anna Cheney. I am the chairperson for the Agriculture, Agritourism, and Farming Commission. I'm a resident in Lothian, Maryland. I did grow up on a farm. I actually did make money farming, and my son expects to do the same. We live on a farm in Lothian at this time. The Agritourism Commission is made of farmers, nursery owners, hospitality, and tourism folks. To my knowledge, as of today, there are no planning and zoning professionals with voting options on that commission. Mr. Riggs came to the January meeting of our Agritourism and Farming Commission with a vision of a farm equipment repair shop on a property zone C1, which said use requires a C4 zoning, is my understanding. This agricultural commission was formed subsequent to the issue of Bennett's curse, with the task of advising on the appropriateness of agricultural and agritourism activities within the county, primarily on farm properties. My understanding is this bill effectively upzones and intensifies the uses of hundreds of C1, C2, and C3 commercial properties in the face of our general development plan. I would honorably request that you table this bill for review during the comprehensive rezoning process. It's my understanding that there are opportunities for individual properties to be considered for rezoning based upon either mistakes or changes in the character of the neighborhood and community. This bill should be studied by a small area planning commission to fully understand the scope and implications of intensified uses. We have impending processes insofar as the general development plan, at which time this can be studied. Please table this bill until all appropriate studies can be completed, from defining farm equipment to implications of such a broad and encompassing bill affecting C1, C2, and C3 properties. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Walker?
Ms. Cheney, since the unanimous vote from the commission that you so graciously chair, has the bill, the committee met since the bill has been introduced?
The committee has met. This was not discussed at that time. This
Was there a
bill,
particular reason why it wasn't?
no one brought the bill back to us. We had never had a chance to look at this bill, and this bill is regarding the commercially zoned property.
I'm aware.
Okay, this is not a residential agricultural property.
No, I understand, but your membership supported the concept, and the administration...
Which concept, Mr. Walker? Which concept?
The concept that's laid out in the bill, and the
No,
administration...
sir. No, sir, I'm sorry, it did not. Tell me the concept, please. Clearly state the concept, if you would, and I can answer your question.
The concept that's laid out in the letter says retail, farm sales, and equipment repair.
On one property, yes.
Okay. And the administration had the opportunity to bring the bill to your commission because Mr. Hager sits
Not
in the
this
room.
bill, no, sir.
But you had a meeting since the bill was introduced?
No.
You haven't. When was the last meeting?
I'd have to look at the calendar to tell you the exact date, but I'm going to tell you that the concept that was discussed was one man's vision for repairing farm equipment on one property, sir. It was not a broadcasting bill that affects hundreds of commercial properties in Anne Arundel County and now potentially all of Anne Arundel County, much less the rural legacy area of southern Anne Arundel County.
I'm well aware. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. Sir?
My name is Stuart Cheney. I live in 5682 Granick Road, Lothian, Maryland. I've been around a bit too. And as a matter of fact, I want to mention, since David Riggs is sitting over here, I'm on the opposite side of this bill, but it has nothing to do with him. He's a good friend, and he walked up to my trailer one time I had 2 horses on it, headed for South Carolina. He may not remember this. I didn't even know who he was. He walks up to me and he says, "Sir," he says, "you don't want to be driving in the gear you're in. You need to push this button." Oh, okay. Probably saved my transmission. First time we've talked about that, about 10 years ago. Okay, so 2 weeks ago tonight, you passed a bill 17-18, which was a temporary moratorium. I'm going to try to cut it short because I don't want to be too redundant. So that was a temporary moratorium on all zoning reclassifications until after the GDP. Tonight, you have before you a rezoning classification bill putting basically C4 uses on C1 properties. In the marina industry, it would be similar to putting an MC use, which is marina commercial, in a community marina. So we got a rezoning bill here. In South County, and I did do this, I had Bay Engineering study how many, in South County below 214, how many C1 areas are there over a half acre in that area? There are 22 of them. 2 of them are not on arterial roads, so that's about 10%. So then I hear word that, well, we may change it to be a county-wide bill. So I would figure I called them back today, Bay Engineering. How many C1 sites are there over 1/2 an acre in all of Anne Arundel County? 126. 126. So if 10% of them are not on arterial roads like South County, then it still leaves over 100, 115 places.
Mr. Cheney, I have to ask you to summarize, please.
I am finished. That's 110 or 15 sites that you don't know what the consequences of them are.
Right.
And as I ask you also to table the bill until we can either understand what the consequences are or change the bill so that it makes some sense in the face of the GDP.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can I just ask a question for my own clarification? Ma'am, you are the person that wrote the letter?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. And you're the way I understand, my interpretation of what you said is the letter doesn't say or doesn't doesn't mean what it's been interpreted to mean? Is
That's
that-
absolutely correct. What the letter means is that we supported Mr. Riggs and his effort on one property for a specific use. This commission is not comprised of anyone from planning and zoning who has a voting membership. Therefore, the understanding of such a comprehensive and broad sweeping bill that affects hundreds of commercial properties is beyond the wherewithal or the knowledge of this
Wasn't what you were
group.
talking about. Okay, thank you. I appreciate that very much. Thank you. Mr. Walker? Okay, thank you. All right, is there anybody else who would testify on this matter? Seeing no movement, the hearing on Bill number 3618 is now closed. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill number 3618.
Bill number 3618, an ordinance concerning zoning, commercial districts, farm equipment sales, and service facilities.
Okay, is there any discussion? There are amendments?
Motion to hold.
Is there a motion to hold?
Second?
There's a motion to hold. Any discussion? Madam Secretary, would you please call the roll on the motion to hold?
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
Mr. Fink.
Aye.
Mr. Peruka.
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. The motion to hold the vote on Bill 3618 is adopted.
So I'm assuming it'll be heard again on June 4th.
If that is.
I'm not just assuming, I'm declaring that it's going to be heard again. Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Walker?
Just for the record, the bill was introduced on April 16th, and the commission met on April 19th, so just for the benefit of the council. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Madam Secretary, please read the title of Resolution 1218. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Resolution number 1118, resolution approving appointment to the Board of Trustees for Anne Arundel County Retirement and Pension System.
Thank you. Mr. Grasso is the sponsor? Is that correct?
That's me.
Yes, sir.
Let's get to be aggressive
we're
tonight
on,
again.
we're on Resolution 11.
Up
11.
one more, Chairman.
Oh, excuse me, I said the wrong.
That's okay. I
All right,
got everybody
let me-
doing backflips.
Madam Secretary, please read the title of, you just read the title of Resolution 1118, correct?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Marzick.
Mr. Chairman, members of the council, Bernie Marzick, County Executive's Office. Resolution 1118 reappoints Mary Kathleen Sutlick to the Board of Trustees for the Anne Arundel County Retirement and Pension System. She will serve a 3-year term that will expire April 30th, 2021, and you should have a resume in front of you.
Thank you. Is there any, we'll open the public hearing on Resolution 1118. Does anybody like to testify on this resolution? Seeing no movement, we'll close the public hearing on Resolution 1118. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Resolution 1118.
Resolution number 1118, resolution approving appointment to the Board of Trustees for the Anne Arundel County Retirement and Pension System.
Any discussion? Madam Secretary, please call the roll on Resolution 1118.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
Mr. Fink. Mr. Peruka.
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Resolution 1118 is adopted.
Madam Secretary, please read the title of Resolution 1218.
Resolution number 1218, a resolution recommending notices be posted in restrooms in all county-owned facilities that provide contact information for the National Human Trafficking Resource Center.
Mr. Grasso.
Yep, short and sweet, this is a piece of legislation that came about. A constituent called me, and she was in Las Vegas, Nevada, and she says in all the restrooms, there was signs for anybody that was, I guess, involved with human trafficking, particularly in the stalls. And so this is just a simple suggestion for the county executive and the governor also to post signs in the restrooms in case somebody is a victim of that in conspicuous and inconspicuous places, particularly in stalls. I can only think that if someone has been brought over this country and has been forced into prostitution, of how possibility things might work. And I think the only way that they could probably seek help, that I would think that somebody that was in prison then would probably follow them into the restrooms and watch what they were doing, but the only place that they wouldn't follow them is into an actual stall. So we're asking to have these signs, which I could see is virtually no fiscal impact. That basically was handed to me. It says no one should be forced, deceived, or pressured into work or sex acts basically taking these and posting them in the restrooms and public restrooms throughout Anne Arundel County, along in the stalls, so that in case somebody is watching, folks would have a number to call in the situation. So that's what it is.
Thank you, Mr. Grasso. Mr. Marzick.
Mr. Chairman, members of the council, Bernie Marzick, County Executive's Office. With me at the table, Christine Romans from Central Services, Greg Swain from the Office of Law. We're supportive of this resolution, with the amendment as well. The one item, I think our first target with this will be public restrooms, obviously, and then try to work our way up to the other restrooms. I'll let Ms. Romans build on that if she wants, but obviously that'd be the first target where you're going to have the most use.
Yeah, we were actually just looking for public restrooms, that's it.
Okay.
Ones that people are just going to come into, and the airport has them and BWI, but it's just like over top of the door. So the question is, if someone was even capable of getting a phone or something, how would they be able to look at that number if someone's sitting there watching? But if they're in the stall and the door is closed, smack right there. And it doesn't cost anything, because the same people that would service our bathrooms now are the same ones that make sure an 8.5 by 11 is stuck to the back of the door.
Sure. If you could provide that to us electronically, that'd be helpful as well.
Yep. So that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Grasso. Any discussion and questions? All right, we'll open the public hearing then on Resolution 1218. If anybody wishes to testify, please come down at this time. Seeing the movement, we'll close the hearing on Resolution 1218. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Resolution number 1218.
Resolution number 1218, resolution recommending notices be posted in restrooms in all county-owned facilities that provide contact information for the National Human Trafficking Resource Center.
Thank you. There is an amendment. Madam Secretary, please read Amendment number 1.
Amendment number 1. This amendment expands the recommendation that notices be posted in public restrooms to include spaces that are both easily seen and not easily
Move
seen.
to adopt.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Thank you, Madam Secretary. Please call the roll on Amendment number 1.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
Mr. Fink.
Aye.
And Mr. Peruka.
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Amendment number 1 is adopted.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. We can move on to vote on this one? Thank you. Then, Madam Secretary, please call the roll on Resolution 1218 as amended.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
Mr. Fink.
Aye.
And Mr. Peruka.
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Resolution 1218 as amended is adopted.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Please read the title of Resolution number 1318.
Resolution number 1318, resolution proclaiming the month of May in 2018 as Historic Preservation Month in Anne Arundel County.
Thank you. I'm going to defer to Mr. Hager regarding this. Mr. Hager?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We are delighted that you saw fit to introduce this resolution. My staff are overjoyed. This is National Preservation Month, and we have a lot of preservation activities here in Anne Arundel County that I have a whole division of Office of Planning and Zoning who are involved in actively preserving and investigating the past. It includes historic, cultural, architectural, archaeological work. And this is important in terms of preserving our past, learning about ourselves and our past, and also it's a significant economic development contributor. So we were very happy to see that you saw fit to recognize the work that my department does as part of the overall recognition of National Preservation Month. So thank you for introducing this resolution. And
it's my great pleasure. Thank you, sir. I once had a history teacher that said history is like the is the mall map that gives contextual meaning to the little red arrow or the little red dot that says you are here. So we all know we're someplace, but without knowing our history, we don't know where that place is or who we are. So we very much support that. Is there any discussion?
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Trumbauer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is, I guess, to Mr. Marzick, but I don't recall proclaiming any months recently. Is that, in fact, I forgot that or I didn't know the council had that power. Are there other designated months in Anne Arundel County that off the top of your head?
I think this was done through planning and zoning, and they asked for an accompanying resolution from the council just to support that.
Okay, 'cause I was just doing the math. I have about 6 months left, and I was thinking, what other months do I want to proclaim? But I will.
Chris Trumbauer month.
Not at all.
June will be styrofoam month.
No, it'll be no styrofoam. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Walker? No?
Oh, no, sorry.
Okay. We'll now open the public hearing on Resolution 1318. Does anybody like to testify on Resolution 1318? Seeing no movement, we'll close the public hearing on Resolution 1318. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Resolution 1318.
Resolution number 1318, resolution proclaiming the month of May in 2018 as Historic Preservation Month in Anne Arundel County.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Madam Secretary, please call the roll on Resolution 1318.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
Mr. Fink.
Aye.
Mr. Peruka.
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Resolution number 1318 is adopted.
It's now a matter of history, right? Is there any other business to be brought before the County
Move
Council?
to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries. The County Council is adjourned until June 4th, 2018. Thank you very much.